441. Chapter 441. Silver Moon. 18th June 1995, Hogwarts. Harry left Dumbledore's office feeling a mixture of suppressed rage and vindication. For one, the man's self-delusions had to be on another level. Seriously, how the hell did Grindelwald manage to convince him that bringing out the end of the world would somehow save it from itself? It made Harry wonder what kind of justification Dumbledore could have come up with to accept this plan, of all things. To be honest, the man he had met had been a far cry from the political titan he had faced just a few years prior. Maybe it was because Harry was more of a threat now, and that he'd actually fought the man and won their duel, but he just didn't seem that intimidating. His flaws felt more accentuated, more pronounced, more obvious, for the lack of a better word. It had to be a combination of Dumbledore slowly getting unstable over the past year. The depth he had to go through, the murders, the deaths he had to personally deal with must have affected him deeply. He probably wasn't as detached as he was back in Britain, where he ruined lives with a couple of words and maybe even a letter or two. He didn't end family lines, the Death Eaters did, Voldemort did, and there was always a form of detachment, even if he arranged for horrible things to happen. It was all going according to a plan, a road to his dream of what magical Britain was meant to become. Now he directly massacred students and arranged for children to die, and there was very little he could hide behind, very few arguments he could manage other than it was for the greater good. He collaborated with vampires, and he had indirectly even impeded the light by destroying Olympus. After all, had he let the Olympians be fully corrupted and subsumed by the light, he'd have very powerful allies during Ragnarok. It was probably why Grindelwald chose this prophecy to destroy in the first place. This was probably Grindelwald's greatest achievement. He took the champion of light and brought him down to his level, made him sink into doing the dirty work for him, and now he was reaping the results. Honestly, Harry had always assumed that the headmaster was a man with a heart of stone, unfeeling for the suffering of others, unable to appreciate the possibility of progressing past his designs. He hadn't expected him to be like this and slowly spiral down because of his actions. It was just so sudden. The man had been fine for over a year, so why now? It didn't make him any less dangerous. If anything, it even made him more dangerous, but Harry could use that. It was a delight to see the fall of Albus Dumbledore. The man had probably committed more atrocities than most Dark Lords in history, and Harry could see the small cracks in the man's self-delusions, which he planned to pry off one by one, relishing the pain the former headmaster would suffer. And wasn't it wonderful that Dumbledore obviously didn't know about Grindelwald's true plan? He thought that he was saving humanity and then fighting with his nemesis. It was sad that Harry knew more about his own plan than himself. He had planted the seeds of doubt, showed him that there was obviously more to Grindelwald's ambition than just saving the world, and all he had to do was to let things fester and reap it during the final battle. Still, the meeting was pretty odd, all things considered. Dumbledore must have known that Harry had no intention of stepping aside and letting him take control of things, and that nothing would be achieved by speaking with one another. Was he planning on getting Harry to reveal something without meaning to? Every single word the young wizard said had been calculated to make sure that it wouldn't happen, even if he might have been carried away a bit near the end. Was it some form of trap, a distraction for Harry? Maybe a plan to kidnap Daphne before that fateful day? It was likely not. Harry was fully ready to deploy his countermeasures and get the entire task cancelled. It was why he was sure that Daphne wouldn't be kidnapped until the prophecy was broken. It was the only time when the small leverage Harry had on Grindelwald and Dumbledore would disappear completely. They would be under the protection of Nurmengard, and there was very little Harry could do about it. That's what they thought anyway. He had to suppress the urge to grin at the thought. His musings were interrupted by someone tapping his shoulder. "Hello, Harry Potter." The voice was familiar and had a dreamy quality to it. It took him a bit too much time to recognize it. It wasn't exactly his fault. He hadn't really heard her speak in over a year. "Hello, Luna Lovegood," he retorted with a faint smile on his lips. He turned and saw her. Luna had definitely grown up since the last time he saw her. She was taller, her blonde hair got a silver tinge to it, as if it was glowing, and it flowed down to her waist. Most of all, she seemed a bit more confident. He hadn't heard anything happen between her and her housemates recently, but he wasn't exactly actively looking for them. He had asked Tracy and Blaze to keep an eye on her when the tournament began. According to them, a few people tried to bully her, but she held her own most of the time, and they backed off after that. "And here I thought that you forgot about me," the girl asked with an amused tone. "Forget about you?" "Never," Harry replied honestly, even if he felt a bit bad about not speaking with her for a very long time. In another life, perhaps, Luna Lovegood would have been part of his close friend group. She would have been with him as he fought in the tournament, helped him fight off vampires, or helped him investigate Dumbledore's actions. Unfortunately, for all her intelligence, Harry found her to be a bit too innocent to fight at her age, which was something he didn't want to ruin. Well, calling her innocent was a bit of an exaggeration. It was more like the fact that she'd been possessed by the diary, betrayed by someone she considered to be her friend, and Harry hadn't wanted to put more burdens on the girl. There was also the fact that her magical education was always a bit behind that of Daphne, Blaze, and Tracy, and it would have made her feel like she had to catch up constantly. Feeling a bit awkward, he asked, "So how have you been?" "I'm all right, at least now that I know that Dad is all right after the war with the lockdown finally ending. The Lycans and Death Eaters didn't attack him, thankfully, but the ICW made him stop printing the Quibbler for lack of investigative works, whatever that means. He's been trying to renew the license at the Ministry, but it's a pretty slow process. What about you?" Harry gave her an incredulous look, which made the Ravenclaw burst into laughter. "Oh, you should have seen your face. It was just so funny." He rolled his eyes at that. "Let's just say that the last few months were exciting, to say the least. I was worried when they said that you disappeared in Durmstrang. You were also in Olympus too, right?" To say that he was surprised was an understatement. "How the hell did you figure that out? Even Blaze and Tracy didn't know until I told them." The blonde rolled her eyes, "As if you'd let Daphne run around on her own. And I watched a few illegal omnioculars on the first day of the 6th task, and that sealed the deal. Anyone who knew anything about Carmichael would know that he tended to crumble under pressure. Even then, he wouldn't have been able to do a tenth of what you did while holding back, even on a good day. I'm guessing you used some polyjuice." Harry shook his head. "No, I used an enchanted artifact. It was a lot more stable than a potion that I'd have to take every hour or so." "Was it really that obvious?" "Not really. Carmichael didn't exactly have a close group of friends, and even the few who knew him would have a very hard time getting the omnioculars. I got mine from Blaze a few weeks ago, and it cost me a lot just to borrow them for a day, let alone buy one. I just happened to be more observant than most." And wasn't that an understatement? Luna was a clairvoyant, someone who saw more of the world than most people. In general, clairvoyance is a magical skill that allows someone to perceive the world differently, to see beyond what can be perceived with the naked eye. In a way, Harry's arcane hearing might be a form of clairvoyance, since he could perceive magic in a way others just don't. But the general definition involves a more conceptual nature of the skill. Luna, for example, can just discern the true nature of something, whether someone is good or bad, kind or mean, hateful or loving. The girl had tried to stay away from her gift as much as possible before the incident with the diary, but she had grown out of her shell after that, probably moving past her slight resentful over her skill, probably having seen something during her mother's death. This made Luna a very easy girl to befriend, to say the least. She could easily see through him and understand his motives, something that saved a lot of arguments in the long term. They spent months together where he helped her practice her skills slightly, but even he knew that he was a bit over his head with that one. Nevertheless, while they didn't make any magical progress, Luna stopped being so overwhelmed by what she could see, and now he was seeing the results. The girl had obviously grown far more confident with her skill and definitely stopped spacing out as much as she used to. Staying in Hogwarts had obviously been good to her, and that reassured Harry of his decision not to include her in his pretty messy affairs. He did miss spending time with her, surprisingly more than Tracy and Blaze. Those two had their own thing figured out and had grown into people with their own priorities, which hadn't really matched Harry's own. It was probably why their conversations were a bit awkward since he came back. In contrast, in just a few sentences, he and Luna felt like old friends. as if the year of separation hadn't mattered. In a way, for someone like Luna, whose ability let her see the world differently, she could see exactly how much he had changed and adapt to it with ease. As if she was reading his mind, which she wasn't, he checked. The girl smiled knowingly before muttering, "It seems that we chose a good night for our stroll." Harry snorted and just nodded. "The weather is quite good." The girl nodded as if he had said a very sage comment and started skipping towards the school grounds. Harry followed her without any issues, noticing that the sun had started to set slowly. Minutes later, they had left the castle and made their way towards the forest. They walked past the Black Lake, its dark waters reflecting the silver glow of the stars that had started to appear in the sky. Harry watched Luna's graceful movements, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. The familiar sound of her humming echoed through the night, harmonizing with the soft rustling of leaves and the distant hooting of an owl. Tension that he forgot was even on his shoulders started to dissipate slowly until the girl plumped down beneath his favorite tree. "I liked to come here when you were gone. It always felt a bit more familiar." The young wizard didn't really know what to say to that, and he just let her continue. "You're my first friend, you know. I know that I'm not exactly your first priority and that we have completely different lives. But I wanted you to know that I will never forget what you did for me. You saved me from that diary, and I will always be in your debt." "There are no debts between friends, Luna," Harry calmly answered, while squeezing her shoulder to try to comfort her slightly. "Maybe, but I wanted you to know that you're a good man, Harry Potter." Again, the young wizard was struck speechless by the young girl's proclamation before muttering, "I'm not sure I am, not anymore. I hate that I'm like this now, worrying about fights and politics. I am a scholar. I'm meant to do some research, experiment with magic, not whatever the hell I'm doing now." The girl gave him a sad smile. "Destiny is very rarely kind, but you're managing your role very well. Far better than others have before you. I can see that very clearly. You're a good man, Harry. I thought that I needed to tell you that." The young wizard didn't know why he was feeling so choked up, but he gave the girl a vulnerable smile. "Thank you." Luna returned his smile with a dreamy one of her own, and Harry spoke up without even thinking. "He's dead, you know. Tom, he died a few weeks ago, alone and afraid." Her smile disappeared slightly. "You're talking about Voldemort. They are very different people. Tom has been dead for years, after all." "I suppose you're right. The difference between Tom Riddle and what he became is like night and day." The blonde smiled softly. "Thanks for telling me, though. I was scared that Tom's fascination with me would get Voldemort to target me as well. When I heard he was back, I'll admit to being very afraid. I stopped Dad from taking me out of Hogwarts. I knew that it was safer here." They stood in silence until the girl spoke up with an eerie tone. "There's a storm coming." Harry nodded. She could probably see it, the beginning of something as massive as Ragnarok. "I suppose that's an apt way to call it that. It feels like the very world is holding its breath. It's funny that so many people don't know that their lives will change very soon, and at its center there's you, like the eye of the storm. It feels like it's about to swallow me up." He spoke with a bit of hesitation in his voice. Luna turned and gave him one of the most serious looks he ever saw on her face. "It cannot swallow you if you accept that you are its master. The storm is you, Harry Potter. Soon, you'll have a choice to make, the choice that will decide your fate, whether you will live or die. When the moment comes, you'll need to make terms with who you are, and what your role is in the story is. Promise me you'll remember that." "It's a bit vague, Luna," he muttered. However, she seemed insistent. "Promise me." "I promise," Harry answered with a bit of hesitation. And just like that, the seriousness in Luna's face vanished, and it was replaced with her normal dreamy expression. She then pulled Harry's hands and started to sway while humming. Harry gave her a confused look. "What are you doing?" "Dancing, of course," she uttered as if it hadn't been out of the blue. "You look like you could use a dance." Harry let out a small chuckle, shaking his head, but he didn't resist when Luna pulled him into the gentle rhythm of her swaying. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the distant hum of her melody, and before he realized it, he was moving with her, his steps light, unthinking. For the first time in what felt like years, the weight on his shoulders seemed to lift. The storm, the war, the looming choices, none of it mattered in that moment. There was just the soft glow of the moon, the cool night air, and Luna's laughter as she twirled him unexpectedly, making him stumble before catching himself. He laughed, really laughed, and Luna beamed at him. When the song in her head seemed to end, she stilled, looking up at him with knowing eyes. "See," she whispered, "not all storms are meant to drown you." Harry exhaled, something unspoken settling in his chest. He squeezed her hand lightly. "Thank you, Luna. What do you feel about you and your father taking a small trip to Greece?" She just smiled knowingly, as if she had expected him to ask all along. In a way, maybe she did. 442, Chapter 4, 42, Horn of War. 21st June, 1995, Hogwarts. Today was the day. Harry got up at the rise of dawn, making his preparations as if he were a man possessed. Despite the stakes, he wanted to convince himself that it was nothing more than a normal battle, a normal fight against Dumbledore's forces. After all, he'd had to do that more time than he liked to admit over the past year. However, this was different. Luna had told him before she went to Greece that it felt like the world held its breath, and he understood that now. Magic seemed to pulse brighter, like a heartbeat quickening, anticipating what was coming. Today was the day the greatest prophecy would be fulfilled, one way or another. Today was the day the most important battle in the history of magic would begin, and Atlantis's last legacy would perish. Thousands of years of war would end in a single encounter. People would talk about this battle, probably for centuries, if there even were people. Before Ragnarok, before the mess with Dumbledore and Grindelwald, before wars and prophecies, Harry had wanted nothing more than to be remembered. Death was a natural thing. One should not fear death, but the legacy they leave behind. Harry feared dying alone and forgotten, as if he never even existed. He wanted a mark on the world. It didn't even have to be a big one, just to leave something behind. To be honest, just having someone that loved him, who would remember him, would have been enough. Sure, his name being echoed in greatness was an attractive prospect, but it all felt inconsequential compared to what he had with Daphne. The blonde was up, helping with her preparations as well, her hands trembling slightly. She was nervous. He knew that deep down, but he refused to point it out. It was now too late to go back on the plan, despite wishing he never came up with the damn thing. She was probably as worried about him as he was about her. As much as he liked to present a strong front, he was afraid too. Today, it could go hundreds of different ways, most of them terribly. Today was the day they would be last seen in the future, where their lives would be different forever, no matter the outcome of the war would be. Harry had dozens of possible plans for their survival, but he knew perfectly well that plans rarely lasted long in a war, especially one like this one, and against opponents like Albus Dumbledore and Grindelwald. As if she was sensing his distress, Daphne silently grabbed his hand and held it tightly. He reciprocated, and he could feel the tension disappear from her shoulders. Despite the seriousness of the situation, she spoke up first with a joking tone. "If you ask if I'm sure again, I'm going to hex you. I'm already nervous as it is." Harry snorted. "I learned my lesson after the fourth time you sent a hex at me. Besides, it's too late to back out now anyway. You'd probably be in more danger if we don't go with the plan, even without fate pushing things along." She squeezed his shoulder. "I'll be fine. We rehearsed the whole thing over 100 times. They will not see it coming." "Promise me you'll be careful?" Harry asked softly. "I promise. Now it's your turn." Harry chuckled and pretended to be clueless. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Stop being a prat and promise," the blonde complained. "I promise that I'll be careful." She relaxed slightly, and he let her lean on his shoulder. "I can't believe that it's today. I know you kept talking about it for almost a year now, but it always felt like something remote, in the far distance. After today, everything will be different. The world will be different. Sometimes, more impactful events occur in a handful of hours than in an entire decade. The tensions of this war, the preparations, and the motivations all began thousands of years ago. Now, we must deal with it, as unfortunate as it might be. But did it have to be you? she murmured in a barely audible voice. Fate is not kind. It's funny, really, if Dumbledore hadn't made an enemy out of me, hadn't tried to get control over me and forced my hand, I would have never been in this position. I would have been content staying in this castle, probably unaware of the war between the light and dark. I would have been a scholar and not forced to fight them. Dumbledore and Grindelwald would likely not have had a lot of opposition to their plan. In a way, they created their own enemy out of hubris and paranoia. Then we'd have all died or been enslaved when their plan works, Daphne answered dryly, hardly a very nice outcome to this story. Harry chuckled but didn't reply, instead deciding to just enjoy Daphne's company while he could. Their time together was interrupted by a small tinkling bell ringing. He turned towards it and saw a piece of parchment in the shape of a rave. He took it and grumbled. The blonde gave him a questioning look. What is it? Marinakis is now in the castle. He wants to meet at the arena. Harry looked at his watch and saw that it was almost time for the task. Had time really passed this quickly? He gulped slightly and started to get up. Daphne gave him a sad while, muttering, I need to finish the regents for my blood ritual. I'm almost done. I'll meet you there. He just nodded faintly and stared at her, doing his best to remember her face, the color of her eyes, the shape of her nose, even the worried look. It was time. Harry didn't answer her and just wrapped her in a very tight hug. Remember your promise. She returned it just as tightly. Remember yours as well. Looking at the look on her face, Harry couldn't help but kiss her. It was a desperate thing, one that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Both of them wanted to show the other how much they meant, knowing that this could be the last time for their attempt. With a faint huff, they both eventually broke the kiss, gasping, and Harry whispered, I love you. I love you too. They stayed like that for a while until Harry remembered the summons from Marinakis, got up and reluctantly left his girlfriend with her own preparations for her side of the plan. Harry grabbed the small pouch that had his own preparations and left the Hogwarts grounds silently. His bad mood must have shown on his face as no one even attempted to speak with him. As he neared the arena, he gave the castle one last glance. It was very unlikely he would ever come back again, and a part of him knew that he'd outgrown this place. He had unraveled its mysteries, gotten everything he could from the library, and even copied most of the tomes alongside a few from other schools as well. Although he missed 2 of them as he was stuck in another universe, he'd get to them eventually. Quite the magnificent sight, isn't it? A familiar voice spoke up. Harry turned towards its source. Alexander Marinakis, you asked to see me. The man's blue eyes practically glowed in amusement. The task is going to begin soon. I thought that you'd almost forgotten about the entire plan. I wish I could have, the young wizard muttered. Is everything ready? Yes. Our forces are ready. Vlad is coordinating with the Lycans, and the mercenaries are in a position to attack the fortress, with each group having a few ward breakers from the Department of Mysteries. They still don't know what they're fighting for, only that there would be a lot of vampires. Harry hummed. I don't think we'd have a lot of people left if we told them that we're going to fight Dumbledore and Grindelwald. A few of them are veterans of the Great War. They'd remember what it was like back then. You don't regret sending them off to fight without knowing what's ahead of them? Marinakis asked, but it seemed out of curiosity than any form of criticism. What did he expect? This was the man who was planning on sacrificing his son to attack the Olympians. He shook his head. Their goal is to take care of the vampires, nothing more. If things go according to plan, we will be the ones to fight Dumbledore and Grindelwald. My dear boy, things rarely ever go according to plan in war. I should know given what happened to my school. He hummed, agreeing with his point, but he had no other choice. Harry was powerful enough to deal with the vampires, yes, but it would take him time, something that he didn't exactly have. Everyone capable of doing that would be of more use fighting the 2 champions, not their underlings. Honestly, the fight would probably end up with a lot of losses on both sides. Instead of answering, he asked a question of his own. Will you be able to hold your own against Dumbledore? The man snorted. They don't call me the Stormbringer for nothing, kid. Leave Dumbledore to me while to deal with whatever it is you're planning. But I still think that stopping the prophecy is a lost cause. Even with an entire department of researchers, With access to all recorded prophecies in the country, you couldn't find out which one Dumbledore is planning on using. Stopping the prophecy from breaking would be very beneficial, but it's not the only reason to fight him here. There is no reason why I should use the magical release from the prophecy for my own ends as well. After all, it will have to be a very powerful one, given the fact that it would have to make up for a lot of energy they lost when I intervened during Olympus's destruction. The former headmaster's face turned grim for a fraction of a second before barking out a laugh. You're planning on using their own ritual against them. Huh, very clever. But what could you possibly need so much energy for? Who am I to ruin the surprise? Harry answered, not wanting to give away anything. Let's just say that Dumbledore and Grindelwald are definitely not going to like it. The old man chuckled at that. Sure, keep your secrets, before turning towards the arena. The last Potter found that it was a bit distasteful how the arena looked as if it belonged to a medieval melee, with the ground being made of hard-packed dirt, with wooden barriers reinforced with iron bands enclosing the fighting grounds. They were sitting in high wooden stands draped in banners of the competing schools. A lot of people seemed to like it, and Harry could understand the appeal. The Middle Ages was Britain's magical golden age. Their mages were at their most powerful, and magic was very heavily celebrated, where Camelot prospered. There was also the creation of Hogwarts, where, at the time, competitions like these were somewhat common. Still, it all felt a bit too gladiatorial for Harry's tastes, and instead of enjoying it, he stared at the empty arena, ready for the inevitable start of the task, after which everything would change. Well, calling the arena empty wasn't exactly right. In the middle stood a tall stone pillar with a familiar sword being impaled on top of it. Ascalon, Dumbledore's prize, and the reason people from all over the world even decided to come to the tournament, especially given how much of a fiasco the last task was. Honestly, interest somewhat waned after the task in Durmstrang, and Harry didn't think that a lot of people planned on coming to Britain given the instability they suffered through in the last couple of years. Alas, Albus Dumbledore found a way, like he somehow always did, to make things go in his favour. And the way the sword was presented, like some kind of bastardized Excalibur, an obvious reference for Arthurian legends, just grated Harry the wrong way. They were leaning so badly on the Camelot theme they had going on, not caring that the legendary sword was stolen from the Fae in the first place, or of the legend's tragic end at Camlan. Harry turned towards the high stands, where his former headmaster stood there, watching the sword impassively. He didn't look happy for some reason. He didn't look triumphant or smug, as he also dreaded that the task would begin. He was doing his best, trying to stay away from Fudge, who seemed to want to talk with anyone he could from outside of Britain. Maybe he hoped he could salvage his career by making some economic deal. It wouldn't matter. People were extremely tired of his promises, especially given that the general public blamed him for taking unnecessary risks by hosting 2 international events at once. Slowly but surely, the stands started to get filled by both students and visitors. Harry saw the familiar figure of Daphne coming his way and sat on his left. He was about to speak until a loud horn broke the silence of the entire arena, and McGonagall stood up, addressing the entire crowd. Marinakis muttered, "Now it begins." Harry shook his head and answered, "No, now it ends." They were both right in a way. The moment the task began, so would Ragnarok as well, and with it the end of an era, no matter what the outcome would be. 443, Chapter 443, The Last Prophecy. 21st June 1995, Hogwarts. Marinakis muttered, "Now it begins." Harry shook his head and answered, "No, now it ends." They were both right in a way. The moment the task began, so would Ragnarok as well, and with it the end of an era, no matter what the outcome would be. Harry sat in silence as McGonagall made her announcement about the task and every school's standing. It wasn't exactly exciting. Everyone was assigned points, given how many other people remained in the arena when they would be eliminated, and that the scores would be added for each school to determine the winners of the tournament. The last person standing would, of course, win Ascalon, much to the excitement of the spectators. Honestly, everyone started going nuts whenever the sword was mentioned. Harry could understand the historical value of the artifact, and maybe even a bit of its power, but it was obvious that Dumbledore had an angle by offering it, which should have made people very cautious. Harry could see hundreds of different ways to use this donation, even if the whole mess with Ragnarok wouldn't happen. It was an easy way to regain some influence in Britain, and maybe even a show of wealth which would get Fudge to pardon him for an appropriate donation, given the country's fragile economy. Sure, Harry knew that it was all just to make people come to see the sword in person, which would help with him breaking the prophecy, but the sheer negligence these people came up with was surprising to say the least. And to make things worse, Harry watched the sorry state of the Hogwarts champions. It was obvious that the school's chances were pretty low. Most of the champions were made up of 4th and 5th years, who had been forced to compete since they hadn't had the opportunity to do so, with Hogwarts being locked down during the war. They looked like gangly children against their opponents, who all looked to be of graduating age. Nevertheless, this was not the time to vent his frustrations about the unfairness and the stupidity of other people, and instead he watched the arena carefully, hoping to see a small sign of magic being channeled from the crowd to somewhere else. It required a lot of focus, especially given how much magic was being generated from the crowds. It was like trying to find someone's voice in a concert. For almost 15 minutes, he found nothing, until the first contestant was eliminated, some guy in Nabelheim who was caught by a stray curse from a Durmstrang student. The crowd roared, and for a fraction of a second, Harry saw a small pulse of magic being drained near a certain section of the arena. He focused on it, and it pulsed as well when another contestant was eliminated soon after, showing Harry a clear path towards the forest. Honestly, Dumbledore had done a far better job hiding the connection, using the castle's very own ambient magic to mask the connection, making it feel more like a ward than anything. Harry's runes, which he had put all around the school to warn him of a high concentration of magic moving around, hadn't been triggered at all. If Harry had been anyone else who didn't have his arcane hearing, then he wouldn't have been able to find the ritual. Even then, he could only get a proper lead whenever the crowd's emotion soared, causing a pulse of magic to be sent towards Dumbledore's ritual. It was a bit annoying, but fortunately he didn't have to wait long. He was able to make a good estimation of the ritual's location after just the third elimination, slowly narrowing the search. He turned towards Marinakis and muttered, "It's in the Forbidden Forest." The former headmaster nodded imperceptibly and slowly walked out of the arena. Harry turned towards Daphne and spoke up. "I'll be going now. You know what that means, right?" She nodded. "Good luck." "Good luck to you too, and be ready. Remember the plan. I'll see you on the other side." Harry rushed out of the arena, following Marinakis, and practically ran near the Forbidden Forest. It had been one of his suspicions in terms of where the ritual would take place. After all, Dumbledore needed somewhere private in the castle, where no one would try to interrupt him or stumble on the ritual by accident. To be fair, there was also the option that the ritual would take place outside the castle grounds altogether. After all, Hogwarts was surrounded by vast stretches of empty mainland, plenty of space to conceal a ritual without much difficulty. Still, his detection runes should have alerted him of a high concentration of magic traveling through the forest. After all, he'd put more than enough of them there to prepare him. However, the moment he stepped foot in the forest, he understood why his runes failed so badly. The Forbidden Forest always had a thick form of magic inside it, which Harry had to personally tune his runes to bypass this effect. Well, apparently, Dumbledore altered the ambient magic somehow. It was different and had a similar frequency as the ones belonging to the crowd's energy, even if it was less concentrated. Seriously, Dumbledore had to be personally involved. Harry couldn't see anyone else being able to do such delicate work. The man really decided to make the ritual's location as obscure as possible, which was pretty impressive given the scale of the whole thing. Nevertheless, Harry was able to trace the connection given the concentration of magic, despite it being hidden rather cleverly. He motioned to Marinakis to follow him, and he ran towards the path the energy was taking. It brought him directly towards the acromantula nest. With barely any thought, Harry flicked his wand, releasing a form of black mist that literally wiped every single gigantic spider that tried to come near him from existence. It wasn't exactly hard. Harry had analyzed the creature's magical makeup before, and created a curse that he infused with his family crest to make it extremely corrosive to the spiders, and infused it in a mist to spread around him. He hoped to create one to kill vampire thralls in high concentration, but their magics were extremely resilient, and he didn't find anything that was effective enough to hurt them on a small dosage. Like using it as a mist, but it seemed to work on other creatures, like acromantula. It wasn't something he was especially proud of, but it proved its uses. Behind him, Marinakis whistled. "That's a very dangerous piece of magic there, kid." Harry didn't say anything and ran towards the direction of the ritual, literally wiping out anything that came his way. Half a minute later, he found his next opponent in the form of two giants. With barely any thought, he sent two curses, having tailored their magic to specifically bypass their natural magical resistance, literally cutting them into halves in less than a couple of seconds. Then came the plants. They were frankly horrible, a weird mixture of twisting vines and gaping maws, their petals glowing with an unnatural luminescence. Their roots pulsed with eerie white veins, obviously enhanced by the light, while their blossoms snapped open like jawed traps, revealing rows of crystalline thorns dripping with some kind of silver liquid. Harry didn't exactly have the time to properly assess them, but given their obvious taint from the light, they should have been dangerous. Deciding not to take any chances, Harry just sang them out of existence, literally conjuring a force of magic that was the antithesis of their very being. They melted into a grey puddle. Harry barely had the time to savor his victory as he dodged an attack from behind him, conjuring a spear of ice at the vampire that tried to take him by surprise. He then saw Marinakis immediately wipe out a group of them by conjuring some weird golden lightning that jumped between them. Deciding to replicate the feat, he put the curse he designed especially for vampires into a small bolt of lightning and released it. The small bolt literally jumped from one vampire to another, killing the thralls in seconds and even the vampire lords. The feedback continued until he heard a scream. The spell failed to kill one of them for some reason. Harry warped space in front of him to appear near the man, only to see a vampire elder kneeling, trying to resist its effects. To be fair to him, Harry hadn't exactly designed the curse with an elder in mind, and the spell did get weaker the more it traveled, as most curses of this kind tended to do. All of these must have been his servants, and Harry had essentially wiped out most of his sources of power. After all, vampire often thrived on the power of their underlings. Instead of relishing the being's suffering, Harry conjured a blade of black ice, which he channeled the resurrection stone into, and just decapitated him. Marinakis whistled. "Well, that's the fastest vampire lineage I've seen extinguished, kid. We'll brag about it later. We need to get to the ritual as quickly as possible." They made their way to the ritual once more, which thankfully didn't take long. The vampires were obviously the last defensive measure on Dumbledore's part. They found themselves in a clearing, with a ritual dagger floating in the middle of a runic array, with 5 elder vampires chanting in a language that Harry didn't know, but the magic's purpose was very clear. They were using themselves as channels for the energy coming from the arena, but they were also using a small part of the energy to power a ward separating them, which would stop any magic or physical object from entering. It was a crude thing, with multiple layers of wards, each depending on the very nature of each elder's very soul. They would die after the ritual was concluded, and they obviously knew that. Fucking fanatical bloodsuckers. Still, given the nature of the ritual, they would need to kill all 5 of them before the prophecy was broken to truly stop the prophecy from breaking. He turned towards Marinakis, and the former headmaster had obviously come to the same conclusion. "I need 30 seconds to break the wards. Do you think you can hold them off?" Harry was, of course, talking about the small mountain of thralls and vampire lords running at them. The older man released a bloodthirsty grin. "You worry about the wards. I'll deal with them." Marinakis then raised his hand, and clouds gathered on top of them with the thrum of thunder. In a single blinding attack, a gigantic bolt of lightning fell towards the clearing, essentially vaporizing most of the vampire thralls in a single moment. Yet Harry didn't care, and instead focused on each layer of the shield, analyzing their songs using his arcane hearing. As he promised, it took him a few seconds of concentration until he released a black beam of energy that was precisely aimed towards bypassing the wards. The spell moved slowly, looking like a projectile, breaking through every single ward as if it were just made of paper, until it found the final one, finding itself at the center of the ritual. It touched the ritual knife and released a small space-time singularity which expanded suddenly, swallowing everything around it before collapsing into itself. And just like that, all 5 vampire elders were killed, and with it, everything was destroyed. Marinakis turned towards him, the clearing having become nothing more than a graveyard of vampires, and spoke up. "Is that it?" On paper, this should have been it. The ritual was interrupted, and the ritual blade was destroyed, which was what Dumbledore was planning on using to break the prophecy in the first place. And yet, there was nothing there to indicate a prophecy. Nothing that they were planning on destroying or sacrificing. To be honest, Harry didn't think he'd stop the ritual, hoping to still use some of the magical release against Dumbledore and Grindelwald. There was some irony to it. Given the effort that Dumbledore obviously took to hide the traces of the ritual's location, this was too easy. There was something missing. Something that should have been obvious. It couldn't have been that easy. For one, Dumbledore wasn't there. There should have been more resistance. Harry tried using his arcane hearing, hoping that it would help shed some light on what happened, only to freeze. The magic was still being channeled into the ritual ground, only this time it was far lower. Harry raised his hand, and the ground parted as if it were made of mud, revealing something that was letting out a golden glow. A rock, perhaps. Harry didn't have time to really process what he was, as he had to warp space to avoid an attack coming his way. He didn't know what it was, but his arcane hearing was screaming. He turned to see his attacker, only to freeze slightly as he saw the familiar figure of Albus Dumbledore glaring at him. He had expected a fight with the man, of course, but he never expected to see him wielding a sword, especially one that seemed to literally give him a headache whenever he tried to analyze it. The sword felt more like a fragment of light, a crystallized fragment of a realm that was somehow held together with a small strand of time. It was an abomination, to say the least, something that should have never come into being. Dumbledore smirked as he saw the frown on Harry's face as he looked at the atrocity in the shape of a sword. "I have to admit that when Gellert said that you'd see through my little trick, that it would have taken you far more time. No offense, but the last time we fought, I took your wand and vaporized your arm. You should have learned not to underestimate me by now." The element of surprise only works once. Still, it achieved its purpose. You are too late to stop the ritual, not that you had a chance. I had simply hoped that you were wise enough not to try to do this, that things wouldn't get messy. Fighting here achieves nothing, Potter. There is no path where you would emerge from this encounter, stopping me from breaking the prophecy, even with the extra help, he spoke, motioning to Marinakis. Harry digested what Dumbledore implied very quickly. The whole thing was a labyrinth of sacrifices, each layer meant to delay any interference. The vampires were just lambs he sent to slaughter, who were actually protecting nothing beneath his wards. Dumbledore had lied to them and used them as a misdirection, either hoping that Harry would not notice that the magic was still flowing into the boulder, or to give Dumbledore more time to set something else up. Either way, the entire setup was designed for one thing: time. Still, Harry forced himself to roll his eyes, trying to perceive Dumbledore's inevitable trap. "I see that you're still trusting Grindelwald blindly, even after all this time. Your reliance on his divination will backfire on you horribly, that I can guarantee." During the conversation, the young wizard hadn't remained idle. Instead, he did his best to ignore the sword and focused on the weird golden boulder beneath it. It was filled with what seemed to be hundreds of layered enchantments, and they were definitely old, practically ancient even. It was also familiar, very much so. Not the magic itself, but the core of its structure. It took him a second to place it back to its source. He remembered it when he confronted Nimue. So this stone had some fey magic for some reason. Was it part of the prophecy somehow? If so, then why try to channel so much magic into it? Something didn't make sense, and Dumbledore was obviously not going to tell him. Still, the former headmaster shook his head sadly. "Please leave. You are doing nothing more than endangering our world. What I am doing here isn't out of malice, but survival." Marinakis burst into laughter. "Only a deluded mind would say that bringing about the end of days is about survival. As Dumbledore opened his mouth to reply, Harry twisted space and conjured an ice blade, infused with the Resurrection Stone's essence, then banished it toward the Champion of Light. Dumbledore lazily stepped aside, not even bothering to raise his sword, only for the blade to vanish mid-air, reappearing directly above him, now 100 times its original size. Harry really liked non-Euclidean space magic, which alone made studying Solomon's magic worth it. The idea was simple. Use the attack as a distraction, force Dumbledore's attention away, and let the real target, the boulder, shatter unnoticed. It was a long shot at best, more of a probing attack really. With a single fluid motion, Dumbledore cut the entire thing in half, his blade of crystallized light unraveling the spell as though it had never existed. In the same breath, he raised a luminous shield, neutralizing the gigantic bolt of lightning Marinakis had hurled at him. The shockwave that followed was apocalyptic, ripping through half a mile of the forbidden forest, reducing ancient trees to splinters and carving a crater into the earth. And yet Dumbledore remained untouched, standing at the center of the destruction as if it were beneath his notice. The only indication that anything had even happened was the slight furrow in his brow. Harry exhaled slowly. He knew deep down that this was different from his last fight with Dumbledore. There was a finality to it, whereas he had previously been blinded by his overconfidence and his hate for Harry, where he didn't expect a teenager to be able to hurt him. The man before him was different. This was Dumbledore the warrior who had fought wars, who had wiped out entire armies with a single attack, fully prepared to attack with everything he had. And that was definitely a different kind of beast entirely. As if he was proving his point, the man raised his sword in the air, and Harry felt the entire world take a breath of anticipation. 444, Chapter 444, Stealing Destiny. 21st June 1995, Hogwarts. Albus Dumbledore had to admit, in the privacy of his mind of course, that Harry Potter was impressively persistent. The boy had to have known that he wouldn't win, not when he didn't have the element of surprise on his side. Even without the Elder Wand, the former headmaster was the superior mage in every single way. The plan was relatively simple. He would obscure the location of the ritual as much as possible and essentially create a plant, a series of fake protections, hoping that they'd slow down the boy while the ritual was actually being performed elsewhere. It had worked very well. Sure, the boy had discovered the stone that he was powering with the ritual, but not quickly enough to be able to destroy it. By now, the stone was impervious to damage unless someone absorbed its magic first, an impossible feat in the time they had. By then, Albus would have already broken the prophecy and joined Gellert in Nurmengard for the final ritual. To be honest, he'd been somewhat wary about the ritual. Some of what the boy said during their last confrontation stayed with him, specifically the part where Gellert was surely planning on messing with the ritual. The Champion of Light had taken a look at it, and while he wasn't as good when it came to crafting rituals as Gellert, he was more than capable of figuring out their mechanics. Surprisingly, Albus had literally found nothing unusual. He had triple-checked the calculations, and the ritual would do what Gellert claimed. It would transport humanity to another dimension and give them the ability to return after things have settled. To be honest, he'd been somewhat worried that Gellert would only decide to save the mages and leave billions of muggles to die for no other reason than spite and paranoia. He knew it deep down, bringing about Ragnarok on their terms, without humanity being in the way, was by far the best plan they could have come up with. The end of days was inevitable anyway, and saving as many people as possible was the best thing they could do. After all, even if it had taken place in a century or two, they had no guarantee that there would be someone strong enough to make the hard choices, much like he and Gellert had many times before. In a way, the opposition was expected. People always like to rebel against change and progress. It was always the way of things. Today, the war between the light and dark would end, and the victor would lead humanity into a new golden age, which could terrify people. Resistance was expected, but not someone like Harry Potter or Alexander Marinakis. They had proven themselves to be dangerous, extremely dangerous even. And so, as they attacked him, Albus decided to make quick work of them. After all, he only needed to wait until the ritual was over and leave. Attacking the buried stone would make it leak energy slightly, which would delay things. Given his calculations, he only had a few minutes until the ritual would be over. And so he raised his sword and finally channeled his light into it. Excalibur glowed white, with what seemed to be white flames slowly dancing around him, being more an expression of the light than a fire. This was the first time he would wield Excalibur in combat, and it would likely be the last. So why not make the most of it? He activated the magic, and a beam of white energy, whose power even surprised Albus, appeared towards the Potter boy, blinding the entire forest before continuing past, creating a gigantic tunnel that ruptured through the hill behind the boy. A part of Albus marveled at the sheer firepower the weapon granted him, only to barely dodge another ice attack from the boy, showing that he was still alive somehow. Albus was proven to be correct when the dust settled and the boy still stood, slightly singed but unharmed. How? The attack should have vaporized him. He shouldn't have been able to direct it with his space magic. The boy shouldn't have had the reflexes to cast anything, let alone manipulate space fast enough to escape. Why couldn't things just work for once? Of course, that was when he had to deal with the attacks from Marinakis and Potter. The Greek wizard conjured some sort of weird black lightning that he sent at Albus, who dodged it easily enough, only to have to shield against a beam of darkness from the Potter boy. Of course, that was when the original bolt of lightning veered towards him, space being manipulated to try to take him off guard. Instead of shielding or dodging again, Albus used the sword and infused the bolt of lightning with his light and threw it back at his opponents. He then leapt towards the boy, his sword allowing him to channel magic into his body and make him move far faster than anyone his age had any right to. The Potter boy dodged his first strike, but tried to manipulate space to counter the second one. However, Excalibur cut through the warped space as if it didn't exist and slashed the boy's chest. The young wizard gasped in pain at what happened, but the wound looked superficial at best. Somehow the boy managed to throw himself back enough that only the tip of Albus's sword touched him. Still, his robes were cut cleanly in two, where Dumbledore had hit him, with blood slowly seeping through. However, the boy seemed to be grinning for some reason. Distractions are really useful, aren't they, Dumbledore? The former headmaster barely had the time to process what happened as he heard a gigantic crack of lightning falling behind him, specifically towards the rune-engraved ice blade that he had dodged when the fight started, which sat right above the stone he was meant to protect. Damn it, that was magic that was spent protecting the stone instead of charging the ritual. It wasn't that much in the grand scheme of things, but it would slow down the ritual if the stone was attacked repeatedly. And so Albus lashed out, releasing gigantic arcs of light around him, stopping Marinakis from continuing the onslaught before releasing a beam of light into the air, cutting through the storm that had been gathering. He then parried an attack from the Potter boy, whose black ice blade almost hit his neck, which shattered against Excalibur as if it were made of glass. The former headmaster relished seeing the shock on the boy's face and tried to capitalize by conjuring a spear of light aimed at the boy's heart. Unfortunately, it missed as the boy burst into dozens of ravens, which surrounded him, slowly picking up speed and creating a small tornado. Suddenly, one of the ravens burst out of the shadows, trying to attack him. Albus felt the corrosive curse that came with that particular spell and released a pulse of light that dispelled the entire attack, sending the boy flying back into his human form. Albus, though, didn't have time to capitalize as Marinakis appeared in front of him with a sword of lightning in his hand, throwing it at him. Albus parried it with Excalibur instinctively, only for the lightning to explode, shocking him as the blades met. He suppressed the urge to groan in pain and instead tried to bisect the Greek mage, only for the blade to pass through the man, having turned himself into lightning. Thankfully, the champion of light was able to shield himself from the attack and raised his hand, conjuring hundreds of spikes of light, throwing them in a circle and hitting everything around him. He grinned as he realized that one of the blades must have hit his opponent, and he followed by conjuring chains of light to bind the man and kill him once and for all. However, instead of being taken off guard, the wounded Greek mage was hit with a gigantic bolt of lightning that almost turned the entire clearing into a crater. A fraction of a second later, where the Greek mage had stood before, instead was a towering figure stood there. Calling it large was an understatement. It was almost as tall as the astronomy tower and made entirely of lightning. wielding a trident which seemed to shift colors between white, green, and blue. A part of Albus froze at that, not at the display of power, but at the sheer nostalgia he felt for some reason. Without even meaning to, he muttered, "Poseidon." The entire battlefield was silent apart from the crack of thunder in the distance. The sky had turned cloudy, almost covering the entire horizon. He had to admit that this was an impressive piece of magic, to say the least. The power requirements alone, to essentially rewrite the weather on a whim, were impressive, to say the least. Nevertheless, the man opposed him, the savior of humanity, given the way he was moving towards Albus, and so he had no other choice but to raise his weapon and release Excalibur's full might. A beam of pure light appeared out of thin air and struck the chest of the towering figure. There seemed to be a resistance for a fraction of a second, but it sent through all the same, seemingly splitting the sky itself into two. The magic destabilized and slowly faded into nothing. However, Albus did not have time to celebrate, as he felt an attack from his left. The Potter boy had sent a beam of darkness at him, which Albus dispelled entirely using his sword. He foolishly leapt towards the headmaster, who swung his sword, preparing to kill him, only for the weapon to pass through the boy as if he didn't exist. The former headmaster barely had enough time to widen his eyes as he felt the boy's ice sword impale him through the heart. For a moment there was silence, as if even the world itself had forgotten to breathe. Dumbledore looked down. The blade of black ice was buried deep in his chest, the magic around it humming with soul-crushing force. He could feel it trying to injure his very soul, hoping to weaken him, but Excalibur's mind resisted it, stopping it from spreading, healing both his body and his soul. Yet Albus's first instinct was to move, to cut the boy down, to break him before the pain set in. But his arm wouldn't move. He looked down and saw golden runes binding it like chains, which were impaled to the ground. Before he even finished processing what happened, his other hand felt stretched, somehow restrained using lightning of all things, revealing that a slightly injured Marinakis was responsible for it. Then thunder started to rumble, the clouds having discreetly moved once more, only this time Potter's magic seemed to sift through it. A gigantic raven of black lightning fell from the clouds before being concentrated into a gigantic blast, practically plasma made of the same energy that the Potter boy liked to use to injure souls. As quickly as he could, Albus released a powerful pulse of light that broke the runes and the binding lightning, before releasing a beam of white light from his sword, battling the gigantic attack that his opponents had conjured. Suddenly the two beams met, and the outcome was a gigantic pulse of power that literally vaporized half of the forest, the clearing included. Dumbledore, slightly wounded, slowly struggled to his feet, watching his opponents do the same, having survived the attack somehow. Albus felt the sword in his hands slowly empowering the light to heal his body completely. The burns, the cuts, the bruises all faded away as if they didn't exist. The boy looked slightly injured, limping slightly, and the Greek mage didn't look any better. They raised their wands towards him, and Albus suppressed a grin. After all, the ritual had amassed the energy he needed. Instead of attacking them once more, he turned towards the glowing rock behind him. It was no longer submerged in the ground, given his opponent's final attack, showing the world its splendor. Its faint glow and the obvious fey runes carved into it revealed its purpose. This was the stone from which Arthur Pendragon pulled Excalibur. Merlin had stolen it from the Fae with the sword and used it as an incubator to give it its modified properties. In a twisted form of irony, Dumbledore was using it to destroy the sword it created. If it had been a normal prophecy, Albus would have only needed a normal ritual knife to channel enough energy to break it. However, this was Excalibur, the sword of promised victory. This was a legendary Fey weapon that Merlin himself stole and enchanted. It was a fragment of fate in the light-given form, and it was not that easily destroyed. It had taken a while to figure it out. He needed a sample of the original enchantments to trick the sword into not releasing the countless countermeasures Merlin put in place. And then he needed a lot of energy to power a counter-charm, followed by a gigantic strike to destroy the sword. It was fairly tricky to say the least, but Albus had done it. And so, instead of attacking, he smiled at his opponents and spoke up. "I told you that you cannot stop me." And just like that, with a heavy heart, Albus committed the greatest act of sacrilege in his life and stabbed Excalibur into the boulder. For a moment, the world stood still. The light seemed to hesitate, as if realizing too late what was about to happen. The runes on the stone flared brighter, and so did the sword, its handle even becoming scalding hot. He could feel the outrage of the light, the sheer betrayal it felt. The light screamed, and the world itself turned white. 445. Chapter 445, Covered Bases. 21st June 1995, Hogwarts. And just like that, with a heavy heart, Albus committed the greatest act of sacrilege in his life and stabbed Excalibur into the boulder. The light screamed, and the world itself turned white. Harry opened his eyes, still in shock at what he had witnessed. His ears were still ringing by the scream he heard when it happened. There was still the normal wrongness when destroying a prophecy, but there was more to it. There was a horror, an anger expressed in the form of a high-pitched scream. It wasn't hard to guess that the light itself was angry. Seriously, what the actual fuck? That sword in Dumbledore's hand was by far the most bullshit weapon that Harry had ever seen, and he wasn't kidding. It could dispel practically any magic, create light beams that literally cut through an entire hill, manage to wound Marinakis even with the whole lightning avatar he had going on, and literally cut through anything. The only thing that trumped it was Harry's invisibility cloak, which allowed him to phase through it. The weapon basically amplified most light attacks, and it was most likely barely a scratch on the surface of what it could do. It was obvious that Dumbledore was not experienced when it came to using the sword, but that didn't detract from the fact that it was a very impressive weapon. That's not to mention the whole weaponized fate thing and the healing factor it granted Dumbledore. To be honest, it had taken Harry embarrassingly long to realize what it was. It wasn't until he translated a few of the Fey runes on the boulder that he realized that Dumbledore was wielding Excalibur, the sword of promised victory, formerly Caliburn, the sword of selection before it was stolen by Merlin and turned into the weapon before him. And Dumbledore had destroyed it. Harry blinked as he opened his eyes and saw the shattered boulder which Dumbledore used to destroy the sword, as well as small fragments of the weapon slowly fading into light, with the former headmaster being nowhere to be found, even with his arcane hearing. Harry slumped slightly, a mixture of frustration and relief. It was nice that the fight with Dumbledore was over, but with what happened with the light, it was possible that Dumbledore would be at his weakest. Not that Harry would have bet his life on that. With Ragnarok coming soon, the light would not so easily abandon its champion, despite the obvious betrayal. Next to him, Marinakis groaned, "He's gone?" "Seems so," Harry answered. "So much for stopping him from breaking the prophecy. Who would have thought that his sword was the prophecy he wanted to break? It seems foolish to destroy a weapon like that." "Not if you know Albus Dumbledore," the young wizard commented. "He's a man who would kill his entire family twice over if it helped advance his goals. He probably thinks that this is a great sacrifice or something like that. At least that thing is gone now. I don't think I've ever seen something as abominable as that before." The former headmaster hummed. "Then why did he leave?" "It doesn't seem like him to leave an enemy alive." Harry shook his head. "I'm not sure. I think he realized that the fight between us would drag out, and that he would win nothing by doing it. He already achieved his purpose. Either way, it doesn't matter. The plan was for us to escape anyway, so this changes nothing really." In the privacy of his mind, the last Potter would admit that he was worried about Dumbledore's reaction. The magical release had been a lot more violent than Harry expected, not just because of the prophecy, but because of the light's rage. He never considered the fact that his former headmaster would betray his own patron like that. It was an extremely reckless move on Dumbledore's part, to say the least, and if Harry had to guess, the man suffered massively for it, and that was what made him leave. No matter how much it would have pained Dumbledore, the right choice was to fight them and try to kill them. After all, without Harry there, his main opposition lost its figurehead, and most importantly, the greatest threat to his plans would be gone. Nevertheless, even with the changes in Dumbledore's behavior, Harry's main objective was achieved, and the Greek mage seemed to notice that Harry wasn't displeased. "So, did you get what we came here for?" Harry grinned smugly. Not yet. What do you mean, not yet? Time is such a beautiful concept, isn't it? The Greek mage looked at the remains of the rock and probably saw the floating rocks. The young wizard did not let the man say anything and just waved his wand, letting the rocks keep falling. Slowly, a pulse of golden light seemed to materialize, and Harry raised the elder wand, letting it absorb the energy coming his way. The whole process took about 10 minutes, after which Harry's wand started to heat up, showing that it was nearing its limit as to how much magic it could contain. Marinakis raised an eyebrow. How did you do that? Harry let out a small grin. I just created a miniature temporary subspace around the entire ritual space. I made it right as I realized what he was about to do. All of the excess magical release from the ritual would have been spread into it, frozen in an instant of time. I just opened it back up and let time go back to normal and absorbed the energy on my own terms. Marinakis frowned. Then why not have it absorb the entire magical release then? Because Dumbledore would have easily found out and dispelled the whole thing without too much trouble. The original plan was that I'd access the subspace after we escaped his retaliation. Not that he ended up doing that. Still, the idea was to be subtle, to steal as much of the magical release and use it against them. But you could have stopped Dumbledore from using the magical release and stolen it for yourself. Wouldn't that have been a risk worth taking? You aimed too low, and now we missed a viable chance at stopping Ragnarok. Harry let out a feral grin. This was never about stopping Ragnarok, Alexander Marinakis. This was always about fulfilling it. Without saying anything else, the young wizard raised his wand, and two very familiar items appeared in his hands. He heard Marinakis gasp in shock at the sight of the artifacts. Is that the Philosopher's Stone? The last Potter nodded. It is. Flamel arranged for me to get it, knowing what I could achieve with it. This, on the other hand, is the fang of the world serpent, capable of rupturing through dimensions, containing the very essence of Jörmungandr, or at least what remains of it. It had been a challenge, to say the least, but the Chamber of Secrets, Jörmungandr's prison and corpse, was now gone, its essence distilled, its energy concentrated in a single glowing golden fang that hid the small dimension's worth of energy contained within. Harry couldn't have managed to do it without Solomon's magic system, which gave him a lot of leeway when it came to magic efficiency. The Norse runes surrounding the tooth were nothing more than the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it all were millions, if not billions, of runes carved through space and time in a subspace of magic of sorts, utilizing Solomon's multidimensional warping of magical formulas. This was by far the pinnacle of Harry's mastery of space and time magic, the ability to literally condense a dimension into an artifact. Similarly, the Philosopher's Stone was filled with runes, but Flamel had already used alchemy to condense the energy very admirably. The runes were to turn the stone into the weapon he was slowly turning it into. With another flick of his wand, the two artifacts levitated, and Harry moved his hand like a musical composer, and in a way he was. And just like that, he sang. Golden light started to envelop both weapons as if assessing them, with hundreds of runes appearing out of thin air, enveloping them, being absorbed into them. Slowly but surely, the fangs slowly started to elongate, becoming less physical and more akin to a fractal that was shifting in and out of reality. It seemed impossibly big and yet fit in the palm of his hand. Similarly, the Philosopher's Stone didn't look like it was made of matter, but rather a physical manifestation of energy. Harry slowly channeled the Philosopher's Stone, taking the light essence inside it to pinpoint the multidimensional location of the light. A small spark of light appeared, which he shaped into a ball, which he touched with the tip of Jörmungandr's fang. He grabbed his wand, took most of the energy he had just absorbed from Dumbledore's ritual, channeled it into the fang, and then slashed the air. A rift appeared, like a tear in reality itself. The rift pulsed, jagged and raw, the very fabric of reality peeling apart like torn parchment. Beyond it was no swirling void, no endless abyss. Just light. But not light as mortals knew it, not the gentle warmth of the sun or the soft glow of a Lumos spell. This was absolute, immutable, a presence so vast and rigid that it defied description, pressing down on existence like an unrelenting law that had never once been questioned. It did not shimmer or flicker, did not cast shadows. It simply was. Yet Harry was unperturbed, and instead put the small spark of light back into Nicholas Flamel's masterpiece, and then made the connection with the fragment of the dark inside the world serpent's fang to create another rift next to it. Yet this one was the opposite in every way. Where the first rift radiated an unyielding, rigid light, this one devoured, shifting and writhing like a wound in reality that refused to heal. The edges bled into existence, not sharp and defined, but fluid, unfathomable, as if it were never meant to be contained in the first place. The darkness beyond was not a mere absence of light. It was a presence, a force that moved, that breathed, that hungered. This sight, this contrast between the two powers would have made most people run away, terrified by the sheer presence alone. Harry knew that this was barely more than a pinprick, that he was only able to do it because of the world serpent's very nature as a weapon against enemy realms. It wasn't hard to reconfigure it to make the whole thing one way. After all, despite the rip, the god's protection of the material realm, which stopped the powers from invading, still existed. Mordred still remained in his post, protecting Midgard as he had for centuries. Yet Harry had made a small hole in these protections, not enough to cause an invasion, but enough that it could be exploited in some way. The young wizard could already feel the small interest towards him. He had been noticed. However, he didn't panic. After all, this was all part of the plan. Nevertheless, he needed to work quickly, and he threw the Philosopher's Stone into the Dark's domain and threw Jörmungandr's Fang at the Light's domain before closing the breach with a flick of his wand. And just like that, the world calmed down. The intense pressure and wind that he'd felt previously disappeared, and a smile grew on Harry's face. Now I've done it. That was the light and dark, Marinakis muttered, his face pale in the face of what he was seeing. You could have started Ragnarok right here and now. No, I couldn't have, the young wizard denied. Believe me, I took precautions. Precautions could be circumvented, you know that, the Greek mage protested. Harry had to admit that Marinakis had a point there, but that he was also lacking in information. Not a lot of people knew about the protections that the elder gods gave Midgard specifically against the light and dark invading. It was why Gjallarhorn was so dangerous. It could rip through these protections, allowing the entities to pass through unimpeded. That aside, there was also the fact that Harry had added his own measures, which would stop anything from getting in, and had even made sure that he'd be able to close the rifts permanently from his side, specifically enhanced with what remained of the magical release stored in the Elder Wand. After all, he spent weeks fine-tuning and obsessing over the whole plan, trying to account for every possibility. Still, for Marinakis' sake, of course, but the risk was minimal given the fact that I held the breaches open for less than a second. There were risks, of course, but they were more than worth it for what I achieved. And what did you achieve? You just threw away two of the most powerful artifacts in history. You burned through half of the energy you stole from Dumbledore, and you ripped open reality. Tell me it was worth it, Harry. Harry let out a snicker. Believe me, it was. No matter what happens in the battle, I just made sure that Dumbledore and Grindelwald would lose. For now, the only thing we need to do is stop Grindelwald's ritual. Marinakis shook his head, but with a small smile on his face. Well, that's easier said than done. What about Dumbledore? He already lost. He just doesn't know it yet. Grindelwald's ritual is his own, where he betrayed Dumbledore, and I just changed the course of Ragnarok. He can be a troublesome opponent, to say the least, but while he technically won this battle, he lost the entire war. If he's in Nurmengard, then we'll fight him there. If he's not, then that's one less thing to worry about. Our chances of victory have climbed significantly. We only need to delay Grindelwald's ritual as much as possible. Marinakis was about to reply, only to stiffen. Your girlfriend was just kidnapped from the stands. My agents say that it was the vampires. They left a message for you. Harry stood rigid as well. Grindelwald finally made his move then. The Greek mage put his hand on Harry's shoulders, comforting him. She'll be all right. She's a strong girl, and this was all part of the plan, your plan. He nodded. Yes, it is. Now why don't you go to Nurmengard and join the rest of the army? Vlad should have broken the wards by now. You'll be needed on the battlefield. As for me, well, Grindelwald left me a message. It's only polite that I see it in person. Marinakis' grin turned bloodthirsty, and with a crack of lightning, he was gone. Harry exhaled, turning toward the waiting storm. Grindelwald had called, and now Harry would answer. 446, Chapter 446, Wolves and Sheep. 21st June 1995, Nurmengard. Marinakis' grin turned bloodthirsty, and with a crack of lightning, he was gone. Harry exhaled, turning toward the waiting storm. Grindelwald had called, and now Harry would answer. Remus Lupin had never been a good man. Not in the way people thought good men should be. He had killed, more than he could count. Innocent, guilty, it made no difference in war. He had done it for a dream of a world where his people weren't hunted like rabid dogs, where they weren't treated as monsters before they even had a chance to be men. He knew that it would have been a long road ahead, with many hurdles to say the least. He thought that he was foolish. The dream that they would one day not just be looked down upon with scorn and fear, not be treated as second-rate citizens for the progressive idiots that pretended to be considerate, but become true citizens with equal rights and be treated in the exact same way. He had hedged his bet on Lily Evans, a brilliant girl who cured him, who made him better, more, all in exchange for serving her. She promised that she would do the same to the rest of the werewolves in the world, to turn their curse into something more, something better. With that done, there would be no more werewolves, only lichens, and the general population would have no reason to fear them, not anymore. After all, their bites were no longer contagious. When she had disappeared all these years ago in Godric's Hollow, it had been the single most devastating loss to his people. He hadn't realized what had happened, still wrestling with the wolf inside him, but when he came back to Britain, he found no sign of Lily, only ash and death. It had taken years to find a way to bring her back, a mixture of the connection between him and Lily, and his sheer tenacity. But she was back, and when she returned, she did exactly what she had promised. Werewolves were no more, and only lichens remained. Sure, they were subservient to her by nature, but it was a far better fate than what awaited them as normal werewolves. They fought away against Voldemort, and to be completely honest, Remus didn't mind that. After all, it was the Death Eaters who almost killed Lily in the first place. It was the attack on Godric's Hollow that messed up Lily's ritual, and Remus wanted revenge for the years he spent trying to undo what they did, years where his people suffered needlessly. Then Lily died. He hadn't believed it at first, no one did. But she died defending her son from Grindelwald, having hurt the man more than any other person in history, even more than Albus Dumbledore in their fight decades prior. Dumbledore tried to use that to trick them into serving him, to turn them against Harry Potter, but the boy fought Dumbledore and won. He showed everyone who killed Lily Evans, and they all wanted revenge against the champions of light and dark. Remus wanted revenge for their savior as much as any other lichen, but he knew deep down that fighting against Dumbledore and Grindelwald was a doomed endeavor. His people would perish, no matter how powerful their enhancements were. Alas, as Lily's son and his display of power, every lichen obeyed Harry's words like gospel. Remus didn't like how a teenager essentially held his people's fate in his hands, no matter how brilliant he was. Remus had always been hesitant about Lily's influence over his people. He knew that she treated them more like an army than people she cared about. Remus had accepted, long ago, that Lily Evans was a broken woman. She was brilliant in ways that he still couldn't grasp, but she was still broken. What happened to her in the department, what they did to her, changed her in a way that was hard to put into words. She had gained much, but lost so much more. Her empathy and her innocence were replaced with an unnatural ruthlessness and a sheer obsession over her goals that was just too intense to be natural. He had once been tempted to ask Severus about it, as he probably knew more as the head of the Department of Mysteries, but he couldn't bring himself to do it when Lily was alive, and now that she was dead, there was no need to do so in the first place. Nevertheless, someone with barely any empathy was not a good leader for his people, and Remus knew that, but he accepted that he had no other choice. But with Lily dead, as tragic as this was, as angry as Remus felt about it, it was still an opportunity for his people to finally be free. Harry Potter had the keys to this freedom, and he very clearly told him the price. One battle. The Lycans, all of them bar the children, would join him in a single battle, and after that he would relinquish any authority to Remus and leave the Lycans in peace. Remus felt that it was too good to be true, but accepted anyway. He should have trusted his instincts. As he stood before Nurmengard, feeling the sheer might of the magic that protected the fortress, Remus knew that Harry Potter had played him like a fiddle. This was one battle, all right, one that every single Lycan wanted to participate in, hoping to get some revenge against Gellert Grindelwald, the man who had killed their savior. They had no idea what awaited them. The impossible odds they'd have to face disguised as their revenge. Remus would have stopped them. He would have done his best to save as many Lycans as he could from the coming massacre. A familiar voice spoke up from behind him. "It's a beautiful fortress, isn't it?" And it was. Nurmengard had a charm to it, a dark, imposing beauty carved into the mountains, its black stone towers reaching toward the storm-laden sky. The first Lycan didn't turn as he answered, "I suppose one could consider it beautiful. But you didn't come here to talk about beauty, did you, Severus?" Finally, Remus turned to address his former classmate. They had a history between them, a dislike stemming from their younger years, which turned into an uneasy alliance, and even a slight rivalry when Lily returned, which turned into a shared grief when she died. Nevertheless, despite their allegiance, Remus barely had it in him to trust Severus. Not without Lily enforcing him, and every conversation with the man tended to rile him up even further. This was why he wasn't surprised when the potion master spoke up. "I have to admit that I didn't expect to see you here, Lupin. If I were a betting man, I'd have put my money on you hiding away with as many of your people as you could." Remus rolled his eyes, suppressing a wince at how much he wished he had done just that, and answered, "And I'm just as surprised that left that hole in the ministry to come fight." Snape snorted, "I have no plans on fighting. I'm just supervising my wardbreaker to make sure that they adhere to my deal with the Potter boy. After that, my agreements with him will all be over." The first Lycan stiffened at that. "You made a deal with him too?" He regretted letting that out, given the wicked smile on the potion master's face. "I did. Full autonomy over the Department of Mysteries without him pressing his position as Lily's son to take over. It's not that big of a deal, but I'd rather pay my debts when I can, and lending him my warding team wasn't that big of a cost." "He didn't ask for any of your operatives?" Remus questioned. Snape shook his head. "Not a single one. I didn't even know that he was planning a full-scale war when he asked for them. I expected an old tomb or something that he wanted to rob, not attacking fucking Nurmengard. Still, given his forces, I can see why he didn't ask. My department has some very competent fighters, but they're barely more than a drop in the bucket of his forces. There are tens of thousands of mercenaries here. And yet, he asked for my people's help. Your people have abilities that his forces simply don't. You provided a tactical advantage. My unspeakables didn't. Still, I'm surprised that you kept your side of the bargain. I would have fully expected you to back off given the scale of the conflict." Remus actually flinched at that. He wanted to back off, regretting his agreement with Harry Potter now that he understood what he actually wanted to achieve. When Harry had asked for his people for a battle, Remus had expected something like what Lily had done in Britain. He expected a few losses, but not anything near this. Attacking Nurmengard, no matter what the plan could be, was beyond suicidal. Remus would have left with his people if he could. Could being a very key word here. His regret must have shown on his face, because Snape snickered. It was an ugly, bitter sound, obviously delighting in his suffering. "You can't back out, can you? I'm guessing he made you swear a vow." "A blood contract, apparently, to put me at ease. He knew I'd try to convince as many people as possible and ensured that I wouldn't try to convince people to get away. It seemed so reasonable at the time, and now my people will pay the price for it. And to make it worse, he took the children to some safe house, Merlin knows where. He didn't say anything, but the implications alone are very clear." The moment Arcturus Black and Sebastian Delacour came to him, giving him plans on formations and actual battle plans, Remus knew that he'd been had. It was worrying how much went into that single battle, and how the Lycans were being put as frontline fighters, supported by spells from the mercenaries. There were dozens of squads, ambush formations, shielding tactics, and so much more. In just a few weeks, they trained his people to the bone, making warriors out of them, obviously planning on using them as distractions, pawns against Grindelwald's armies. And yet Remus couldn't do anything. He simply agreed that he wouldn't try to convince people not to fight, and given that they had dangled the idea of avenging Lily's death in front of his people, they immediately jumped at the opportunity. They didn't force them. That's the sad part. They didn't force anyone to fight, only Remus's silence. Remus had thought that his people would refuse something unreasonable without his input, and yet the thirst for avenging Lily blinded them all, enough to go fight against the two most powerful beings in the world on the whim of a boy. He didn't know what he expected to see on Severus's face, maybe glee at being tricked by a boy, or outrage as his people were probably going to die. However, he didn't expect to see fondness, of all things. He really is his mother's son, isn't he? That's exactly something that she would do. Remus looked back at his portrayal of Lily, and as warped as it was, he couldn't refute the fact that she would have definitely done this. She would have probably done that if she were desperate. The boy must know that if we survive, we'd never work with him, not again. He's losing all his bargaining chips for a single fight. The potion master looked troubled for a second. He is. He's betting everything on this. Years of work went into this, months of planning for the tactics alone, I think. The logistics would be a nightmare. It was always going to come to this, and he's putting everything he has into it. And the secrecy is worrying. Now that he thought about it, Remus had no idea what the endgame here was, or why they were fighting in the first place. The mercenaries were doing it for the money, his people for revenge against Dumbledore and Grindelwald, but there was nothing about why Harry was fighting, or even why Arcturus Black and Sebastian Delacour spent so much gold on it. They weren't even supposed to fight Dumbledore or Grindelwald directly, only their forces, which are mainly made up of vampires. This was a good idea, generally, but there had to be better times to try to kill Dumbledore and Grindelwald, especially when they're not in a fucking fortress and surrounded by an army. They could have done it at another time or in another space. Suddenly, a black beam of energy erupted from the tallest tower of Nurmengard and flew upwards, slowly darkening the sky in a cloudless storm. Remus felt a chill crawl down his spine as the unnatural darkness spread, blotting out the stars in thick, swirling tendrils. Magic, deep and ancient, resonated in the air, setting his teeth on edge. He wasn't the best at magical sensing, that he would admit, but he recognized a ritual when he saw one, and this one was beyond anything he ever thought possible, and it was woven into the very stones of Nurmengard. The realization came in like a light bulb. Harry knew this. He wanted something to do with the ritual, probably stop it. Given his past history with the two champions, and since it was anchored in Nurmengard, he needed a powerful force to attack the fortress. He turned to say something to Severus, only for the potion master to have vanished. Well, wasn't that typical? Remus could see the mercenaries, the Lycans, all muttering with unease in their voices, only to be interrupted by a very powerful burst of lightning that cut through the coming darkness. Even in the distance, Remus knew immediately who it was. Alexander Marinakis, one of Harry's allies and the former headmaster of Olympus Academy. An entire army stood silent at his appearance, and the former headmaster spoke up, his voice magically echoing across the entire battlefield. Some of you are probably wondering why we're here. We haven't revealed much, that I'll admit, but for a good reason. But now that your lives are on the line, let me tell you exactly why you should fight. You are all here today to stop a great evil that has plagued our society for decades. You are here today to stop the plans of one of the most dangerous men to ever exist. Gellert Grindelwald is in there, right now, preparing one of the most powerful rituals the world has ever seen. If he finishes this ritual, then everything you know, everything you love, will be rewritten in fire and shadow. This is not just about revenge, gold, or honor. This is about survival. Marinakis stepped forward, his presence radiating raw power as the lightning crackled in the sky above him. Now, I will not lie to you, this will not be an easy battle. We are outnumbered. Our enemy fights from within the strongest fortress ever built, and Albus Dumbledore has forsaken us, choosing to side with him. However, Albus Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald are not gods. They are not some beings with infinite power. They are living, breathing men, and looking at you all surrounding me, I know for a fact that we sure as hell are going to fix that." The army cheered loudly, and Marinakis continued, "On this day, Gellert Grindelwald and Albus Dumbledore will fall. For we are ready, for we fight not just for ourselves, but for the generations that will come after us. We fight so that magic remains free, so that no tyrant, no matter how powerful, can bend the world to their will." He raised his hand, and another bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating the faces of the warriors gathered before him. "This is the hour we carve our names into history. This is the night we rip their illusions of invincibility apart. Nurmengard will not be their fortress, it will be their grave." As if it were waiting for his speech to end, the wards around Nurmengard started to crack on their own, jagged fractures of raw magic splintering through the air like glass under pressure before rupturing. A deafening roar erupted from the army, a collective battle cry that shook the very air. Wands flared to life, casting brilliant arcs of magic, while the lichens let loose primal howls that echoed across the battlefield. The ground trembled beneath their charge, a wave of fury and defiance surging toward the fortress. Remus felt the weight of the moment press against his ribs, like the air itself knew what was coming. There was no turning back. Tomorrow the world would wake to something new, or it wouldn't wake at all. 447, Chapter 447, Death and Darkness. 21st June 1995, Hogwarts. Marinakis' grin turned bloodthirsty, and with a crack of lightning he was gone. Harry exhaled, turning toward the waiting storm. Grindelwald had called, and now Harry would answer. Harry walked with purpose as he made his way back to the stands, ready for what awaited him. He couldn't help but feel slightly victorious. He had, as far as he was concerned, just dealt a gigantic blow to the light and dark. They just didn't know it yet. He had changed the course of Ragnarök to his needs. Now he only needed to buy some time until everything is set up properly. The main complication was Grindelwald. Dumbledore was essentially a non-entity now. It was funny how much Grindelwald twisted him, his supposed greatest enemy, into a mockery of a champion of light. He had been played masterfully, every hurdle slowly making him sink into the darkness, until a mockery of a man, a zealot, was only what remained. The former headmaster had no horse in the race, not anymore. Grindelwald was planning on activating his ritual, which would essentially take anything magical to a new realm with him as a godly figure. Or Harry would win, where Dumbledore and Grindelwald would be dead, and the magical world far from their control. Now all he had to do was stop or even just delay Grindelwald's ritual. The ritual itself had to be complex, given its scale and the energy probably coursing through it, and that meant that it would take time before it was ready, time that Harry planned to take advantage of. Unfortunately, this was easier said than done. Fighting Grindelwald alone was beyond foolish, especially at the height of his power. He had done so before and barely escaped by the skin of his teeth, and that was only because of Lily's sacrifice. So yeah, the idea of delaying Grindelwald was nice and everything, but it was beyond complicated to plan, which is why he needed a way into the fortress. Sneaking in wouldn't have been enough. Grindelwald would have expected that and been ready for a hidden attack, hence the plan with Daphne. He wished that he hadn't come up with it, to be honest. Because in the end, it meant placing her in danger, real, immediate danger. Daphne was sharp, ruthless when she needed to be, and a survivor above all else. But Grindelwald was a force of nature, a hurricane wrapped in fire and shadow. Harry had no illusions about what would happen if the old man realized she was more than just another pawn in the game. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus. Worrying wouldn't change the plan. He had done what he could to prepare her, and she was smart enough to keep herself alive. Now he just had to do his part. The young wizard walked up the stands, back to the tournament, barely processing the thousands of spectators cheering as another contestant was eliminated. Out of curiosity, more than anything, he looked at the contest and saw that 3 schools had been eliminated and that Hogwarts was hanging on by a thread thanks to a single champion. But that wasn't the time for sportsmanship or anything like that. Instead, he was staring at Daphne's seat, which held a small piece of parchment instead of her. He took it and read it, his grip tightening with each word. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message was clear. Harry Potter, your friend is quite a fascinating creature. Do not worry, she is unharmed and will remain so depending on your choices moving forward. I am only asking for a single meeting, face to face. I believe that we have much to speak of. I imagine you agree. This will be the last opportunity for us to speak to one another and solve our problem, the final problem. And time is almost upon us. I urge you to make the right decision. Gellert Grindelwald. Harry's jaw clenched, the parchment crumpled in his fist. He knew that this was coming. He had planned for it even, but seeing the threat in person did not make things any better. It wasn't hard to play the part, especially as a pale individual walked up to him and spoke up, "Harry Potter." He turned and saw 5 vampires hiding in plain sight, giving him very smug looks. They were probably hoping to see rage in his eyes, maybe even fear. Instead, what they got was steely eyes. "Grindelwald sent you." The lead vampire, a tall man with sunken cheekbones and a smile too sharp to be anything but predatory, dipped his head. "Indeed. And as you can see, he is most eager for your presence." His gaze flickered briefly to the parchment before returning to Harry's face. "It would be unwise to delay, wouldn't you agree?" Harry was really tempted to blast the smug look on their faces into smithereens. "I suppose it's only polite." He slipped the piece of parchment into his pocket and answered, "Lead the way." The vampires grinned, their amusement deepening, but they said nothing else as they turned and disappeared into the shadows of the stadium. This was it. The final moments of the calm before the storm. This was the breath before the war, before Harry's army attacked Nurmengard. By now, Vlad and Marinakis should have put everyone in a position. The ward specialists from the Department of Mysteries were all in position, as were the Lycans. Harry did regret binding Lupin the way he did. To be perfectly honest, it would have been far better to get him to agree to a simple deal, much like he had done to Snape. Alas, it was obvious that the first Lycan wouldn't risk his people in any way, even for humanity's fate. He would have protested the moment he knew the scale of the conflict, and Harry didn't want to risk it. A binding deal that neither of them would publicly protest or go back on their deal was the only way to ensure that Lupin wouldn't run away with half his forces, trying to foolishly save them. After all, Remus Lupin was a remarkably simple creature when you truly got to know him. Lily's ritual had warped him, making his inner wolf always be at the forefront of his mind. Lupin had resisted it, and instead of turning essentially feral, he concentrated on certain aspects of his wolf, namely his pack. From what Harry knew of Lycans, the whole pack mentality was sort of woven into every werewolf. The idea of being part of a greater whole, a bigger community, but it was just a basic instinct, which they could easily overcome. But Lupin was obsessed to the point of madness and would not risk his people if he could. Nevertheless, this wasn't the time to regret how he handled the Lycans. They were fighting and ready, and to be completely honest, Harry had no plans involving them in the future. If they survived the battle, then any debt they had towards him would be repaid. Now he needed to think of the moment, of Daphne and the vampires leading him to Grindelwald, most likely to Nurmengard. They stayed silent for most of the trip there, but it seemed like Harry's neutral expression irked a few of them. One of the vampires, an elder specifically, let out a low chuckle. "You wear that mask well, Harry Potter," he said, his voice smooth and patient, like a predator toying with its prey. "But courage and foolishness are often the same thing. You think yourself beyond fear, beyond pain. I suppose that watching you break would be entertaining." Harry suppressed the urge to roll his eyes, but his silence allowed another vampire to lean in slightly, his fangs glinting as he whispered, "Did you think we would forget? You slaughtered our kin, cut them down like cattle. Did you think there would be no consequences?" The young mage simply shrugged. "Which ones were those?" "I killed a lot of vampires. Are you talking about the idiots who attacked the World Cup, or the ones in Rome? Maybe they're the ones from Durmstrang. I don't remember their faces, to be honest. There are too many of them. But I do remember a lot of screaming and begging. It's funny, immortal, unfeeling beings or not, they all broke down when I killed them." "You will beg," the first elder promised. his voice now a low, menacing growl. "You will scream, just as they did. You will beg as they have. Our Lord is a generous man. He does not simply take back what is his. No, he gives in return. He will repay you, Harry Potter, and you will understand the price of what you have taken from them. Maybe we'll let that little blonde girl watch. Or maybe she'll even join you." Without another word, one of them raised a hand, and a swirling void of inky blackness ripped open in the space before them. Using his arcane hearing, Harry immediately understood what it was. This was a connection between two shadows, one in Hogwarts and one in Nurmengard, as well as a small portal to go through. It was quite innovative as far as portals went, but really impractical. You needed to mark both shadows prior to forging the connection and let it sit for a few hours to charge it. It was frankly very inefficient. Still, without any hesitation, Harry went through and found himself at a familiar location. Vlad had shown it to him in a memory when they were planning the attack. This was the highest tower in Nurmengard, where the center of Grindelwald's ritual would take place. Their theory was correct. Gellert Grindelwald was kneeling, his hands bleeding out some black liquid which was formed into thousands of runes, which actually hid how complex the ritual was. The entire fortress itself was part of the ritual. Every stone carved around them was filled with runes that altered it, changing it in some way. Grindelwald remained kneeling, not looking up immediately, but Harry knew better than to assume that meant the old man was unaware of his arrival. No, Grindelwald was always aware. "You are early," the Dark Lord finally murmured, his voice hoarse yet laced with amusement. "But then, you were always in such a hurry, weren't you, Harry Potter?" "Where is Daphne?" he demanded. "That's quite demanding from a man in your position, Peveril. However, I suppose it's only natural that you would be angry. Nevertheless, do not worry. She's in the dungeons, being taken care of by a few of my servants, and she will remain there until we conduct our business together." He then turned back to the ritual. "What do you think of it?" Harry's expression remained neutral, and he took the time to observe the ritual, analyzing everything with his arcane hearing. A magnificent piece of magic. It must have taken you years to plan something like this, let alone incorporate it into this very fortress. I'm almost sad that it will all be for nothing. He analyzed the ritual as much as he could. Grindelwald bound it to his will. He did not really need to chant or do anything. Everything, from the greatest goals to the tiniest details, was etched onto the fortress, essentially a focus of a single spell, powered by the single most powerful ritual that the world had ever seen. A part of Harry had hoped that Grindelwald needed to be connected to the ritual in some way. He didn't. He only needed to activate it while waiting for it to power up. Well, that accelerated the time frame a lot, and it also meant that Harry's goal was now a lot harder. He needed to essentially make sure that Grindelwald wouldn't activate the ritual, which didn't exactly bode well for him. The champion of the dark chuckled. "My victory here is inevitable, but I have not brought you here to brag. I realize that this is the first time we've ever spoken to one another in a civilized manner, and this will be the last opportunity for us to do so." "Let go of Daphne, and then we'll talk about being civilized," Harry retorted. The Dark Lord rolled his eyes. "I think not. Young Miss Greengrass is the only reason you aren't attacking me right now. There is no need to fight, Harry, especially now that I have won." "You haven't won anything yet," Harry replied dryly. "Just because you think you're a dozen moves ahead doesn't mean the game is already over." Grindelwald's lips curled into a knowing smile. With a flick of his fingers, a small, ornate chess set appeared between them, the pieces carved from deep obsidian and stark white marble. Curious analogy with chess. You see the world as a game, don't you? Plans upon plans, strategies on top of strategies, each one tailored to your specific opponent. You did it with Albus when you sealed his connection with the light during your duel, and you did it in your fight with me when you countered my divination. You are a magnificent mage, Peveril. There is no doubt about that. But the world is not a game of chess, and this is why you lost." "I haven't lost yet," Harry replied. "The only reason you're in an advantageous position is because you have Daphne." Grindelwald shook his head, disappointed. "My dear, taking Miss Greengrass did nothing more than bring you here for a conversation. Leaving her alone was foolish of you, of course, but she was a target of opportunity, not a strategy. You have lost before you even played, young Peveril. Why don't you let me demonstrate that to you with a game? You want to play chess? Harry's tone was incredulous, but his mind was already working through the implications. Oh, come now, Peveril. Grindelwald's smirk widened. Surely you recognize a game when it is presented to you. A simple contest. No bloodshed, no fire and steel, just two minds battling in the quiet. He leaned forward, voice lowering to a whisper, as if sharing a secret. Perhaps we can make it even more interesting. Tell you what, as long as we play, I will not join the battlefield and massacre your pitiful army, nor will I activate the ritual. I will also not hurt Ms. Greengrass in any way, and should I lose, I will let her go. What about now, Peveril? Are you willing to play our little game? Harry could feel it, the intent of his magic, a pact. It was a promise and a sincere one at that, but it also expected one from Harry as well. To be honest, the young mage hadn't anticipated this, but if Grindelwald was arrogant enough in his victory, then who was he to stop him when he was making a mistake? I agree. As long as we play, I will also not join the battlefield, and should I lose, I will not attempt to interrupt your ritual. He put a smidgen of his crest's magic into the small verbal agreement, making it more binding. It was a curse in its nature, but it could barely be considered that, really. It was more like an enforcement of the agreement. It wasn't binding by any means, but it could easily be confused with the actual magical agreement. Either one of them would break it, really, without dying, but the consequences would still weigh on them. It would be like trying to swim against a current that only grew stronger with resistance. A subtle force, an invisible shackle, not unbreakable, but certainly inconvenient. And in a game like this, even the smallest hesitation could be fatal. Grindelwald's gaze flickered, just for a moment, as if sensing the shift in magic. But his expression remained serene, his smirk unwavering. Clever, he murmured, but ultimately unnecessary. I have no intention of breaking my word, Harry. A game is far more interesting when both players follow the rules, at least at the start. Harry suppressed the urge to roll his eyes. He never expected Grindelwald to hold his words, but now he had turned the attack into something else. It was pretty clear what the Dark Lord wanted, that their fighting wouldn't mess with the fortress. Not too much, at least. What can I say? I'm a cautious man. The Dark Lord's face turned into a predatory grin. I suppose now is the time for our game to begin, don't we? Why don't you play first? I've always been partial to black. Harry rolled his eyes and pushed his pawn forward. We both have pieces on the board. You might have forced me to be here, but my methods, my allies, are still out there. Grindelwald made a move of his own. All you have is a little army of feral beasts and mercenaries. Your only suitable ally is Marinakis, a foreign mage whom they do not trust. I would be surprised if they even got past the wards by the time our game ends. The young mage moved his knight, and the fortress started to shake slightly. The air grew thick with magic, the distant echoes of something shattering reverberating through the sky. Suddenly, the wards around Nurmengard cracked, jagged fractures of raw magic splintering through the air like glass under pressure before rupturing. A deafening roar erupted from the army below, a collective battle cry that shook the very air itself. At the chessboard, Grindelwald's hand froze over his piece. His smirk faltered. Harry leaned back, watching him. You were saying? His voice was almost lazy. Go on, Grindelwald, it's your move. 448, Chapter 4. 48, A Game of Shadows. 21st June 1995, Nurmengard. Gellert Grindelwald knew that his victory was all but certain. After all, he had spent decades planning it, fine-tuning every small detail to ensure his inevitable victory. He had started so long ago, from the moment he built his treasured fortress, he had been sure. Every single stone was reinforced so much so that they were almost indestructible. Every single one was filled with small runes, a part of a whole, the instructions of a ritual so magnificent that Merlin and Morgana themselves would watch entranced as it took place. He had an army at his beck and call of creatures that served him with a conviction that bordered on worship. He had everything he could have ever wanted. His dream of a free magical world was so close he could taste it. He had manipulated Dumbledore into even betraying his light, using humanity as a hostage. He had countered the Potter boys' plan of tricking the light and dark into destroying themselves. Not that he needed to anymore. The moment the ritual was done powering on, he would blow on Gjallarhorn, summon the light and dark to the material realm, and activate his ritual, freeing him completely from their grasp. Whether they died or not did not matter much to him. He would be free either way, and the magical world would be safe, tucked away in his dimension, with him guiding them into prosperity. Sure, it would have been nice to have the entities destroy Midgard and wipe out the Muggles with them, but Gellert would settle with just saving his people. There was nothing that could stop him, not really. The ritual was being powered, and interrupting it would cause a strong enough magical release that it would wipe out most of Europe. Albus wouldn't risk it, not for anything, and the Potter boy definitely wouldn't want the blood of billions on his hands. This should have been his final victory. Alas, Gellert knew that fate wouldn't be so kind. The prophecy of Ragnarok was unpredictable, to say the least. Dozens of wars ended with no victors because of it, Camlan being the most well-known. Destiny always found a way to make people who messed with it pay. And now he sat across fate's agent, the champion of Ragnarok, Harry Potter, who sat across from him, giving him hostile looks. Gellert had the boy in the palm of his hands by taking the Greengrass girl, and had countered the boy's trump card. He had felt the small intrusion into the Dark's domain a few minutes prior and saw the entity immediately attack it like a wild animal, tearing it to shreds. His victory should be assured, but Gellert didn't trust fate, especially now that his divination couldn't work. The ritual, Ragnarok's approach, Excalibur's prophecy's destruction, it was like someone had made thousands of ripples in the previously calm sea of fate, and he couldn't see through it, not anymore, but he didn't need to, not if the boy was convinced not to fight. It was why he had even invited the boy to speak, binding him to their chess game. Gellert's ritual would work without him, his fortress all but guaranteed it, but as an agent of fate, Potter needed to be active. He was bound by both the Greengrass girl being hostage and their game. As for chess, well, Gellert was always a fan of the game. He'd been. With the boy being essentially bound to their game, it should have guaranteed that his strategy would fail. And yet Nurmengard's wards, one of the greatest pieces of magic he, himself, had made, had fallen. The smug look on the boy's face showed that he had planned for it, that he knew about it. After the shock, the small bit of anger and panic was replaced by his assuredness in his defensive measures. He gave the boy a smirk. "It seems that we've got ourselves a game." The boy nodded. "We always did have a game, Grindelwald. You just didn't accept it till now." Gellert grinned and made a move of his own. "Perhaps I should have. It's a strong opening move, that I'll admit, but you're severely underestimating my defenses." As if they were hearing him, a pulse of darkness suddenly created small shadows that floated up into the air and blocked down the very sun. In mere moments, the sun had faded away completely, and the battlefield was pitch black. Then the dead rose from the ground. There was a reason why Gellert liked to bring his greatest enemies into Nurmengard during his first war. One of the foundations of his very protection detail was one of his greatest masterpieces. He had dabbled a lot in necromancy during his youth, where he had integrated it into the very fortress. Should the wards break, the corpses of his enemies would rise and fight for him, not as inferi, but as mages capable of even casting magic, which actually included family crests. The boy before him thought that he was bringing an army of mages and lycans against werewolves, not the remnants of the greatest warriors of the Great War. Thousands of corpses of mages from all over the world gathered and started to meet the attackers firsthand. Then the vampire thralls came. They were animalistic savages at best, fallen into madness. Like a tide of bodies, they appeared from the shadows and started to charge at the incoming army. Gellert saw the shock in the boy's eyes, probably at his display of necromancy than anything else. He had to admit that getting the dead to still absorb ambient magic into their preserved circuits had been extremely hard, to say the least. But it was a worthwhile investment. After all, he had an army under his command, which was why he didn't bother recruiting any mages to his ranks for Ragnarok. They wouldn't be as effective or as loyal, and he knew that he would end up killing half of them out of annoyance in the first few months. It just wasn't worth the hassle. Still, the Dark Lord enjoyed the stupefied look on his opponent's face and spoke up. "You really shouldn't have broken the wards. It would have been a far kinder fate for your forces if you had." That seemed to let the boy regain his bearing as he nodded. "Perhaps, but sometimes you need to lose a few pieces to get a better position on the board." He moved his queen into an attacking position, pressuring his king, and as if it had been waiting for a signal, the sky started to rumble, and hundreds of bolts of lightning fell from the sky, illuminating it briefly with every sound of thunder. Each bolt seemed to strike his forces almost exclusively, whittling them down one by one. Until he came, a titan of lightning emerged from the ground as tall as a mountain. In his hand seemed to be a gigantic trident that commanded the storm itself. With just a few slashes of his weapon, thousands of his undead army and thralls were cut away like a farmer does to wheat. It almost seemed like a judgment from the heavens. It was strangely familiar. A part of Gelert felt like it was screaming at him that he had seen it somewhere before. Sure, he'd known about Marinaki's power, but it wasn't anywhere near what he was witnessing. It didn't matter, he needed to act relatively quickly. In mere seconds, half of his forces were annihilated, and of course he needed to respond similarly. He moved his knight to attack the queen and spoke up. "A very nice move, if a little premature. After all, you just revealed your most powerful piece so early in the game." A screech seemed to echo across the battlefield, followed by another one and then another. Tons of water appeared out of thin air like a gigantic tidal wave, and raced towards the boy's forces, only to be redirected away somehow, likely the Marinaki's boy, Perseus. However, this was a smokescreen, a way to hide the true nature of the attack, where half a dozen gigantic reptiles appeared from the redirected water and attacked the elder Marinakis' gigantic avatar of lightning. Against one, it would have been fine, but against 6 of them would be troublesome, especially given the fact that they were quite fast. Without even looking at the boy, he continued, "Leviathans. I assume you're familiar with them. You killed one of them very publicly during the first task of the tournament. You made quite a stir when you did so. The program almost lost funding due to a lack of faith. After all, why spend millions of galleons on a weapon that a child could defeat? It was almost easy to take over the project." "Marinakis could deal with a few water elementals," the boy replied, retreating his queen while still not committing to an attack. "Who said I only have water elementals?" Gelert answered while using his bishop to put even more pressure on the boy's queen. As if it had been waiting for his instruction, dozens of other leviathans appeared from the fog and, like dragons, released a torrent of dry wind and flames against the boy's army, which conjured a gigantic shield protecting them. It stopped the fire, of course, but the physical might of the fire leviathans was too strong and broke through the protection and cut through the army of lichens and mercenaries. It was obvious that the boy was losing, even if he had put up a valiant fight. And so Gelert spoke up, his voice soft, trying to put as much compassion in it as possible. "We don't need to be enemies, Harry. You do realize that if by some miracle you defeat me, all you'll cause is death in a previously unseen way. The magical release alone would wipe out most of Europe and a good chunk of Asia and Northern Africa. Every single man, woman, and beast alike are following you to your death, either through my force's hand or through their own victory." The boy shrugged, looking oddly unconcerned. "The hardest choices require the strongest wills. If I had to sacrifice millions to save billions, then so be it. Perhaps that makes me a monster, but I learned a very long time ago that the world isn't kind. And you haven't won yet. I still have a few things up my sleeve as well." The boy ignored his queen completely, despite it being under attack, and used the bishop to attack Gelert's own queen. It was then that the battlefield turned silent. There were pulses of darkness. No, it was something that absorbed light somehow, for just a fraction of a second, and every single time, as if invisible, one of his leviathans perished. Then it was his forces, slowly dying, like an invisible ghost attacking them. It was only then that Gelert saw them, statues of angels, with their claws glowing black, and he turned towards the boy, stupefied. "What are they?" just statues charmed to be animated and attack your forces with their nails enhanced with soul magic. But I added a small trick with them as well. I locked them in time whenever they were observed. They're the perfect assassins because they become invincible when they are seen. But the moment you blink, the moment the light goes out, then they strike. This was a very impressive piece of magic, Gellert had to admit. He could see it now, how it was made and conceived, and the danger they posed if his forces couldn't counter them. Thankfully, the vampire elders in his ranks finally proved their worth as they entered the battlefield and created a fog of darkness that turned the world grey. It wasn't exactly light, just a form of darkness that one could see through, and it was enough to stop the spells that absorbed light to support the stone angels. They even started to contain the angels by trapping them in spheres of darkness and killing them while they were out of anyone else's sight, and thus not protected by the time-freezing enchantments. And just like that, the battle turned into what it was always going to be. The Lycans and mercenaries against the vampire lords and elders, and it seemed like they were almost equally matched. No, that wasn't exactly right. The boy's army seemed to be progressing slowly towards the fortress. Damn it, this wasn't going as he expected. To be perfectly honest, it was strange to see himself countered on a tactical level. He knew that he tended to rely on his divination a lot, but the boy hadn't had those aces up his sleeve when he attacked them in his visions. Had he been keeping them hidden, knowing that he would see it coming? It made sense as a way of countering a known seer, but for the boy to be so dedicated to not using a plan until the proper moment wasn't something the Dark Lord ever expected. And it had worked. It was obvious that fate was playing a game. The boy's move was too precise and his counters too effective for it to be just a genius's work. Gellert was one as well. He would know. And he could also feel fate's hand guiding the boy's forces to an undeserved victory. He couldn't risk it, not with the ritual so close to being completed. He needed to press the boy now to stand down. It was the safest way out for all of us. He turned towards the boy and gave him an impassive look. An impressive showing, but it doesn't mean anything, not anymore. Our forces seem to be matched, and yet this is all meaningless in the grand scheme of things. My vampires will hold the line here until the ritual is ready. He stared at the illusion, his jaw clenched, nails digging into the side of the chessboard. Then he spoke, cold and clear. It's your move. If you think that your scheme to kill the light and dark will work, then think again. I personally made sure that your little trick wouldn't infect the light or the dark. Your plan will not work. You literally gain nothing by fighting me, only death and destruction. The last Potter's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before he steeled himself and replied, It's your move. You'll kill her, Gellert replied, showing the illusion of Daphne Greengrass being chained to a chair with small tears streaming down her face. She'll die if you stop my ritual, and you know it. The young wizard froze and stared at the illusion for what seemed to be an entire minute before turning towards Gellert. You said that you wouldn't hurt her. I wouldn't. You would be the one holding the gun. You would be the one responsible, not me. Instead of accepting, the boy gave him a steely look and spoke clearly, It's your move. If you don't value her life, then why don't I make it easier on all of you and order your death? After all, I said that I wouldn't hurt her, but that doesn't mean that someone else can't do it for me. You should really focus on the wording whenever you do a binding deal. A vampire showed itself towards the illusion and took a dagger to the girl's throat, and Gellert continued, This game has gone on for long enough. You will forfeit and order your army to retreat, else the girl dies. For the first time, the boy glared at him. That was the wrong move to make. You're right that I should have paid attention to the wording of our deal. You're right. You have the advantage here. This is your fortress, and I'm the one on a clock. You have me dead to rights, but you haven't killed me yet, have you? You haven't even tried because you think that fate favors me. You think that I have something up my sleeve, something that you didn't account for that would mess with your plans. So you took Daphne, and that's where I drew the line. You really shouldn't have done that. Why? Do you think that I'd regret the death of a girl? No, I think you should be very careful what you bring into your fortress. Grindelwald's eyes widened as the knife sank into the girl's chest, as if it had been summoned out of the vampire's hand, killing the girl. Only, instead of a girl, the dead body slowly morphed into that of Peter Pettigrew, one of Albus's pawns during his war against Voldemort. Slowly but surely, the corpse died and started to release a golden glow. He barely had time to conjure a shield before the fortress started to shake and everything turned white. 449. Chapter 449, Blood and Grass. 21st June, 1995, Nurmengard. Daphne Greengrass didn't think that war would be like this. To be perfectly honest, she fully expected Harry to immediately deny her involvement in the war and that she'd pressure him into joining. She never expected that he'd just go along with it, even if it was obvious that it was through great reluctance. He hated it with a passion, and she could see the guilt on his face during their time together before the battle even began. Fortunately, logic won out. This was the biggest trick when it came to dealing with Harry. If you give him a logical argument, then he'll consider changing his mind. Otherwise, he tended to be as inflexible as they came. There was an arrogance to it, which could arguably be deserved given just how frankly bullshit he tended to come up with. He often found very efficient ways of winning using very abstract plans layered on top of one another until his enemies ended up tangled by their own actions. He was scarily good at it, but he never did that to her. He tended to be very straight with her, especially after their relationship became official. And so, when she told him that she wanted to be involved and used the future kid's words as proof that she would be involved anyway, he accepted, even if he very obviously hated the idea. She wouldn't really admit it to anyone, but the weeks before the final task were some of the best times she ever experienced. There was a certain freedom that came with the idea of her time being limited. She did what she wanted, was transparent with everyone, and best of all, she spent time with Harry, who acted the same way. Her family and friends were safe in Greece, under enough wards to protect them in case things went wrong. Astoria was healed, which had been her life's goal, and would hopefully live a long and wonderful life. This was the best she could do, given the circumstances. She knew that after Ragnarok, things would be different. How different it would be still puzzled her. Harry had dozens, if not hundreds, of contingencies to make sure that they'd survive it. Some of them were pretty absurd, but it did show that he cared. Nevertheless, Daphne had gotten what she wanted. She wasn't just a part of the war, but held a very critical role in it. It was proof of Harry's faith in her and her capabilities. She was proud of it, and yet now she understood why Harry didn't want him involved. This wasn't a clean duel with absurd spells and counters like what happened in Olympus. This wasn't one of her practice matches, which ended with a knockdown. She stared down at the battlefield and saw screams, blood, and death. Nothing more. It hadn't started like that, not even close. Marinakis appeared in a bolt of lightning, reassuring her that Harry's fight with Dumbledore went well, and then gave a wonderful speech. Vlad managed to break the wards from the inside, just as he promised, and the army charged ahead. Only they weren't met with vampires as they expected, but inferi. No, calling them inferi would be like calling Hogwarts a hovel. No, they were more than that. For one, they could cast spells, and a few of them had some very recognizable family magics. She even saw someone using light magic in a very similar way to Blaise, someone conjuring hundreds of golden gems and banishing them, with a flick of their hands, and someone using ice magic that was very similar to her mother. It hadn't taken long for her to realize that these inferi were dead mages, and that Grindelwald somehow managed to get them to use their family crests. Of course, they weren't exactly as powerful as the normal mages. They couldn't generate magic, and so had limited reserves, which the Dark Lord charged, likely through the wards, and they weren't as tactical. Dealing with them would have been easy if it hadn't been for the gigantic wave of vampire thralls that accompanied them. They shielded them with their bodies and overwhelmed the Lycans trying to reach them. Things didn't look up until Marinakis finally decided to take them seriously and turned into a gigantic being of pure lightning, razing them with just swipes of their swords. Of course, that didn't last for long. The Leviathans came, which Perseus countered, but there were these weird fire elemental versions of them that also caused a lot of damage. That was until they finally released the Weeping Angels. She didn't know why Harry called them that, or why he liked having them cover their own eyes. They were extremely creepy, to say the least, terrifying even. There was just something unsettling about things moving when you couldn't see them, and it didn't help that they could almost kill anything with their claws being enhanced with soul magic. They were also almost indestructible when they were seen, since Harry time-locked them whenever they were observed. These things were an army unto themselves, literally used in conjunction with a few spells that Harry taught the mercenaries. They literally started to carve their way through the armies. A few vampire elders managed to stop them, but not enough. Never enough. Daphne walked to the center of the battlefield, wearing the uniform of one of the mercenaries and using an illusion to hide her face. She conjured a shield of ice, stopping some spears of darkness from hitting the squad of lichens and mercenaries accompanying her, and then killed the vampire lords attacking her by sending a volley of her own. The rest of her squad followed along with her. She couldn't use her druidic magic during the fight. It was too distinctive and would easily reveal that she wasn't a prisoner inside the fortress. Instead, she used ice magic, which was slightly more common, but still deadly enough for her. She knelt down and saw a lichen with half his chest torn off, trying desperately to survive. He wouldn't make it long. If he had been in St. Mungo's and had a small arsenal of healing potions, maybe she could have done something, but not in these conditions. The blonde walked over a few corpses of mercenaries, doing her best to make it so it wouldn't affect her. It made her doubt the reasons why she wanted to come to the war in the first place. This wasn't what she imagined. She expected a noble fight, one army against another, with their own wiping out the enemy completely, not this. The grass looked almost red with the blood spilt, or maybe it was the vampire's blood magic. Who cared anyway? The sad thing was that this was all just the surface of Harry's plan, nothing more than the first layer, the distraction. She didn't envy her boyfriend's position at all. She stared at the small army of dead people before a member of her squad shook her. "Are you all right?" She nodded without saying anything, not trusting her voice. It was time for her part of the plan, the part that Harry trusted her to do. During the entirety of the battle, Daphne discreetly used her version of her druidic magic, which she had used to combine with blood magic. Beneath the very battlefield, her crimson roots started to move around, encircling where the wards used to be, and slowly morphing into a very simple, yet very powerful magical circle. Every death, either from the vampires, the mercenaries, or the lichens, fed her roots, empowering the ritual she had adapted for this use. There was an irony to the fact that this ritual was originally designed by Lily Evans, the woman that Grindelwald murdered and who still gave him trouble even beyond the grave. Harry had been the one to propose the plan, but he obviously hadn't liked it, not just because of Daphne's involvement, but what it represented. They didn't need to fight a true battle. All these deaths, which she was witnessing firsthand, didn't mean much, not really. No mercenary or lichen was going to stop Grindelwald. Harry was. Harry knew that perfectly, and instead chose to make use of the deaths to hurt the Dark Lord instead of changing it. It was the right move, she knew that. She had made the calculations, just as Harry had, and this saved far more lives even in the short term. But using human lives like this, it made her uncomfortable, and from the looks of it, even Harry didn't like it at all. In a way, all this fighting was for Daphne to make her move, and it was a lot of pressure, to say the least. Every single person she saw dying was there to power her spell, the remnants of their life force slowly seeping down to the ground and being absorbed by her roots. Meanwhile, she was slowly moving the roots to their optimal positions, in the form of the runes that she had learned from Harry's mother. Blood magic was based on sacrifice, on making a deal with either the world itself or with someone while keeping the balance. Lily liked to say that with enough power you could change the world and shape it to your desires. What Daphne sought to do was beyond ambitious, and that meant that she needed a lot of power. It still wasn't enough, but it was getting closer. She could almost feel it, the deal almost being struck, the world ready to be changed with every death. She walked forward, being protected by her squad until the entire area surrounding her was covered in darkness. The noises of spellfire and death disappeared. Her squad's leader gave her a commanding look. "Stand behind me." That was the last thing he said before being impaled by a black blade. She sent a spear of ice at the source, only for it to fade away in the darkness surrounding her. She barely blinked her eyes when she heard another squelch and saw someone else fall down, dead. Whatever was attacking her was too fast, and her protectors slowly fell apart one by one. She felt something try to come for her, and she used her ice magic to suck the heat out of her surroundings, freezing the attacker just inches away from her neck. It was her own version of Harry's Ice Age spell, which she had trained herself to do. She released a wide-area curse to break it, but all she heard was a giggle. Nevertheless, the curse morphed into a counter, which dispelled the shadows around her, revealing what seemed to be a grinning vampire elder. What do we have here? A lost little girl thinking herself a warrior. It's a shame that you would die here. You have potential. Damn it, she wasn't supposed to engage any vampire elders. The weeping angels were supposed to handle them, but there didn't seem to be any of them around. Before she could say something, a gigantic wolf seemed to leap and take the vampire with it. He threw the elder away and turned towards her. He turned back into a human form, and Daphne recognized him immediately, despite the lichen being covered in blood. Lupin? Her former professor nodded. Harry asked that I make sure you wouldn't be hurt. Before Daphne could respond, a deep chill crawled up her spine. They were surrounded. From every direction the shadows thickened and twisted. Dozens of vampire elders emerged like living statues from the darkness. Each wore different robes of ancient make, their eyes glowing crimson, mouths split in knowing grins. This was a game to them, she realized. They didn't think that they would ever lose, not against them. Daphne could hold her own, but not while finishing up her ritual. She turned to Lupin and gave him a knowing look. He nodded, understanding. I'm assuming Harry has something for you to do. I'll hold them off. You finish whatever you're doing. As if waiting for them to signal, one of the elders raised his withered hand and the shadows obeyed. Blades shot forward. Lupin didn't flinch. He dove in front of Daphne, a wand already slashing through the air, conjuring a golden shield just in time to block the first wave of shadow darts. The force rocked him back, but he didn't fall. With a snarl he shifted, bones snapping, fur sprouting as his body morphed into a massive silver-streaked wolf. The nearest elder lunged forward, fangs bared, claws slashing, but Lupin ducked low, jaws clamping down on the vampire's leg. With a violent twist, he tore it off, then finished the creature with a spell mid-shift, setting it ablaze in purple fire as he returned to human form for a heartbeat. The vampire turned to ash, but Daphne knew that vampire elders couldn't be killed so easily. Harry found that soul magic worked best, but they could be trapped, and their regeneration could be halted if they were absolutely disintegrated. It was why the weeping angels were so important. They were Harry's answer to the vampire elder's regeneration. Still, Daphne decided to lend him a hand and conjured ice to freeze the vampire mid-regeneration. Lupin turned to her, confused. What are you doing? Another elder appeared behind him. He turned just in time to intercept a shadow tendril aimed for his neck, catching it with his bare hand and biting into it with wolfish teeth. Then, twisting, he cast an exploding charm at the vampire's face, blowing its head apart in a spray of black ichor, which she also froze, halting his regeneration. I'm stopping them from regenerating. I'll be fine. You need to finish up, the lichen replied. Daphne didn't argue. There wasn't time. Already 3 more elders were moving toward them in a half-circle, conjuring tendrils of the living night that lashed out like whips. She dropped to one knee, planting her palms against the blood-soaked soil to help focus her ritual, speed becoming far more important than subtlety, given that she was being surrounded. Lupin roared, the sound echoing like thunder through the cursed darkness. He leapt at the first of the advancing elders, claws raking across the creature's face before landing behind it and slamming a stunning spell into its spine. It crumpled, shrieking, but he didn't stop. He twisted left, backhanded a shadow spear aside, and shifted forms mid-motion, his wolf form slamming into a second elder and tackling it to the ground. They rolled, claws tearing, teeth snapping. The third elder caught him in the side with a shadow blade, driving it clean through his ribs. Lupin howled, bit down on the blade and ripped it out with his jaws, then hurled a curse at the elder's leg, snapping bone. Then he raised his wand to the sky, and a brilliant white glyph ignited above him, pulsing with light, searing into the elder he had just downed. The vampire shrieked as the light clung to its wounds like fire, halting its regeneration completely, its flesh refusing to knit, its bones remaining shattered. This wasn't a normal form of light magic. This was a mimicry of Dumbledore's light. The difference was obvious, to say the least. This had Lily's fingerprint all over it. Did she plan on fighting Grindelwald sometime and just create a spell just in case? "Keep going," he shouted over his shoulder, blood dripping from his mouth. Daphne gritted her teeth. The roots moved around, responding to her call. She could feel the ritual being almost ready, just a little longer. Two elders lunged at her, sensing her vulnerability. Lupin was there again, tattered, limping, bloodied. He crushed one into the ground, blasting it point blank with another burst of light magic that seared through its chest. Then he twisted, blocking a second with a shimmering ward before slamming his wand down and releasing a shockwave of light that sent three elders flying. But the shadows struck back. Blades of darkness pierced him, one through the thigh, two into his back, another caught him clean in the stomach. He staggered but remained standing. Then more came. Dozens. They impaled him like a pincushion, yet he still stood between her and death, eyes glowing with fury. And then Daphne's roots were done. They had enough energy and were in the correct shape, so she activated the ritual. She sent a signal through her connection with Peter Pettigrew and gave him his final command. She had been somewhat leery of this. To be perfectly honest, she didn't know what to do with the man who had tried to kidnap her once. Harry had tricked him into being her servant, and all she did with him was order him to help her father using his animagus form. He really was a sorry excuse for a wizard, all things considered. She didn't like using human lives in her ritual, but perhaps this one deserved it. This was one of the main contributors to the fire of Godric's Hollow and the deaths involved. This was the man who had leaked the location of the Potters, knowing that it would likely get the entire family killed. This was the man who almost killed Harry once more, trapping him in the Gardens of Avalon on Dumbledore's orders. It was only fitting that he would take her place and trick Grindelwald. And just like that, Peter Pettigrew perished, his death achieving far more than he ever did when he was alive. Daphne's roots pulsed with blinding light, focused by Pettigrew's death, spreading through the very fortress of Nurmengard. The fortress was almost impregnable, each stone enchanted and reinforced for decades. However, Peter Pettigrew's body was inside. The dead man started to glow, acting as the focus of her ritual, and the battlefield exploded in light. 450. Chapter 450, Traps and Games. 21st June, 1995, Nurmengard. Slowly but surely the corpse died and started to release a golden glow. He barely had time to conjure a shield before the fortress started to shake, and everything turned white. When the light faded from his eyes and he could finally see once more, Harry let out a grin as the seemingly impregnable fortress of Nurmengard started to crack and fall away. There were no traces of the elder vampires, only Grindelwald, who was doing his best to hold the entire fortress together to shape his ritual. The moment Nurmengard fell, the entire ritual, which was etched across every single stone in the fortress, would fail. Despite himself, Harry relaxed slightly. After all, this was proof that Daphne was well and that she was able to activate the ritual. While he trusted her with his life, he really didn't want to make her complicit in the ritual. She was essentially using the deaths on a battlefield to power her ritual, and he knew that deep down it would change her. He wasn't happy about it, to say the least. Nevertheless, it was also something that Grindelwald didn't see coming. Harry's letting Daphne be part of the fighting was something completely uncharacteristic, and it worked splendidly. Sure, choosing Pettigrew to replace Daphne was a bit vindictive on his part. Harry still remembered being in the Garden of Avalon and the agony he felt for what felt like a lifetime, and he remembered Pettigrew's role in this. He was also pretty forgettable and very easy to access, given he was bound by Daphne. And now Nurmengard was falling, just as he planned. He turned towards Grindelwald and saw the Dark Lord surrounded by pure darkness, obviously straining at the fact that he was holding an entire magical fortress by himself. He turned towards Harry and growled, "What did you do?" "Me? I did nothing," the young wizard replied. "I was right here with you, playing our game." "Do not play jokes with me, Peveril," the Dark Lord snarled. I'm not. You were the one who took the bait and took Daphne. You were the one who planned on using her as a hostage. You were the one who took her deep inside your castle, beyond the wards, beyond your security enchantments, because what harm could she do, right? Now Nurmengard is falling, and eventually so will your ritual. I didn't even break the rules of our game. I did nothing to stop you after all. I had already arranged for everything before I came here. You should really focus on the wording whenever you do a binding deal, after all. Harry answered, echoing back the man's words. Grindelwald remained silent for a fraction of a second, as if processing what was happening. It was obvious that he didn't expect this, which was a very good thing. Tricking a seer was very troublesome, especially one as powerful as Grindelwald. But in a time when fate was in flux, divination counted for very little. Finally, the Dark Lord's eyes steeled, almost glowing in anger, and he whipped his wand towards Harry. This changes nothing, you know. Nurmengard will remain standing until the ritual is complete. My subordinates will take my place, keeping it together at any moment now. All you have achieved is inconveniencing me for a moment. Perhaps, but it's enough for me. But I believe we have a game to finish. Do you remember the board's position? It was your turn, if I'm not mistaken? The young mage asked, pointing his wand at his enemy as well. The Dark Lord's eyes almost glowed in his fury, especially given his tone. The game is over, Peveril. You have nothing to win by trying to fight me. If your plan was to destroy Nurmengard, then it failed. Your plan to destroy the light and dark has failed. Soon my army will hold the fortress, and the ritual will be complete. You have achieved nothing. You are gaining nothing by stubbornly looking at a game that you will inevitably lose. Harry suppressed the urge to grin and spoke up. About that army of yours. I believe that it's been substantially reduced. Grindelwald stiffened and spoke up. Knight to Queen 3. You didn't seriously think that I'd use such a ritual just to destroy this fortress. I could have done so myself or found a lot easier ways to do that. And I know that you'd have been able to hold it all back yourself. You're a very clever man, Grindelwald, but you're also a narcissist. You assumed that this was about destroying Nurmengard to stop the ritual. This was about removing all your pieces one by one, but to do that I had to trick you. Bishop takes knight. Bishop takes bishop, the Dark Lord retorted, forcefully stealing his expression. You didn't make it easy. Being a seer is a bit of a cheat, to be honest. You probably evaluated thousands of futures, seeing every single one of my reactions, and I knew that. It was only right that I use a cheat of my own. I believe this is familiar, Harry answered while throwing him a familiar diary. Grindelwald caught it, and his eyes widened as he recognized it. Harry explained it to him. One of your counterpart's diaries, I believe. I was trapped in his universe after the whole fiasco in Durmstrang. It was quite revealing. The divination was extremely useful, even if I would never master it in time to fight you in it. But it did give me a lot of insight into how you used it. I knew that you would bypass my initial counter, so I decided on something far more subtle. I knew exactly when you tried to divine the future, and I arranged for you to see exactly what I wanted you to see. I had safeguards to stop you from going with any of them, each one stopping the final task from taking place, forcing you to delay this confrontation until the last moment, when fate is in flux, when you are at your weakest, when you wouldn't see me coming, when you wouldn't see her coming. Bishop takes bishop. You played our game well, but that doesn't change its outcome. Rook takes bishop. Rook takes rook. Look at your army and tell me what you see, Harry simply retorted. Grindelwald glanced towards the window and froze. It was completely silent. There were no sounds of spellfire or deaths. Without any prompting, the vampires slowly turned to ash despite the sun being clouded, vampire lords and elders alike. How? I told you that the ritual was never meant to destroy the fortress. This is just a nice side effect. No, it's an expanded form of my mother's ritual she used to turn werewolves into lichens. Blood magic is finicky like that. I needed a sample of what makes a vampire, and thankfully I had the first one in my corner. Vlad, Grindelwald practically snarled, pawn takes rook. The Dark Lord must have realized just how much he'd been played. Vlad had been the one to arrange for Daphne to be taken. Harry had fed him information that would almost guarantee his trust if Grindelwald used his divination. Harry, though, continued, "Of course, you can't modify something without changing something else in return, and believe me, it's a rule of blood magic. I'm not a master in the field, of course, but Daphne is quite gifted. She was Lily's apprentice, you know. It took a while, but we found a way to increase the strength of your vampires, make them stronger, faster, and so much more. But that came at the price of being weak, not just to sunlight, but to every source of light. It's an equivalent exchange, more power in exchange for more weakness. Light is everywhere, isn't it? Most of them died in seconds. The rest, their regeneration is stopping them from dying. These ones will either die at the hands of my weeping angels, or will remain dying and regenerating for an eternity. I think the former is kinder, to be honest. Bishop takes pawn, check." Grindelwald remained silent for a fraction of a second, processing what has just transpired, and just glared at Harry. "I really should have killed you when I had the chance. Prophecy be damned." The young mage nodded. "You probably should have. But the past is the past, and the ink is dry. Shall we finish our game?" "Once I'm done with our business here," the Dark Lord replied, staying oddly neutral, but the undercurrent of his rage was extremely obvious. "I want you to know that I'll find the most creative endings for Ms. Greengrass and her family." Harry slowed down his perception of time and observed his surroundings. Grindelwald's advantage was very simple. He was a lot more powerful and had the dark on his. Harry's main advantage, on the other hand, was the man's rage, and the fact that he needed to keep an entire fortress together for his ritual. Grindelwald was the one who made the first move, conjuring a beam of darkness, which Harry transmuted into ash, which he slowly used to fire back an attack at him. The Dark Lord shielded, however the young mage created a pulse in space, destabilizing the entire structure. Grindelwald buckled, and Harry used that to conjure an ice blade, channeling the resurrection stone, and impaled him with it. However, the Dark Lord dodged, banishing away, a baton of darkness that disintegrated everything around him. Harry used his invisibility cloak to phase through without too many issues, and impaled the man with his blade. The fortress shook, but remained stable, Grindelwald then releasing a pulse of darkness around him, catching Harry and throwing him away. Slowly but surely, darkness started to overwhelm everything in sight, swallowing everything around him. Harry released a beam of light, countering the attack, and they struggled in a contest of magical strength. It wasn't something that Harry was going to win. He knew that for a fact. There was a reason he engineered the fight against Grindelwald to be this way, weakened by holding an entire fortress together with his army gone completely. And just as he planned, Grindelwald's beam of darkness fizzled away as the fortress shook once more. Harry let go of his spell and watched Grindelwald buckle, as if connected to the fortress itself, the darkness receding. He suppressed a grin. After all, Harry had tasked his army to physically attack the fortress after the attack. Each spell took away a part of his concentration, a part of his control over his magic, and Harry channeled his crest to take advantage of this moment of weakness as much as possible, his cloak, the stone on the ring he wore, and his wand heating up, creating a translucent grey, almost misty scythe. He warped space in front of Grindelwald and bisected the man. Right as he was about to do that, Grindelwald did the unthinkable and released a pulse of darkness so powerful that it literally destroyed the very fortress he sought to keep together. Harry was thrown away from the crumbling fortress, ready to activate his measures to contain the magical release from the ritual, only for nothing to happen. The ritual was still active somehow, and that meant that Grindelwald was still alive. Cracks of apparition echoed across the battlefield. Technically speaking, their contracts were done. The fortress was destroyed, and the vampires were gone. Harry had specifically told them not to fight Grindelwald or Dumbledore. They wouldn't last long. No one would. Slowly, shadows started to come together, morph into what seemed to be a tall humanoid figure with glowing red eyes which rasped, "Did you think that this was it? Did you think that I would be defeated by a few clever tricks and a twist of fate?" The voice was warped, layered with too many voices at once. The creature that emerged from the darkness no longer resembled Grindelwald, not entirely. His form was taller, leaner, and unnatural. His skin was stretched too tight, and the air around him shimmered, overwhelmed by the darkness. Harry rose slowly to his feet, wand steady, cloak fluttering behind him, doing his best to understand what he was witnessing. Grindelwald was using himself as a living avatar of the dark, replacing his very body with its energy. It was beyond foolish. Binding yourself to an entity like that was insane, but theoretically, if he had planned on using his soul only to ascend to another realm, taking the magical world with him, then he didn't technically need his body in the long run. Even for a champion of the dark, this was just wrong, and despite himself, Harry echoed, "What have you done?" "I am Nurmengard, boy. It's more than just some fortress. I laid every brick and made every enchantment. It is an expression of myself, and so long as I live, Nurmengard does as well. And as long as Nurmengard exists, then my ritual will take place." "You're using your own soul to finish the ritual," Harry spoke up, realizing what was happening. "Do you have any idea what could happen? Your very being will be warped. You will die in every way that matters. Even if your soul doesn't implode, the being that will remain will not be you. Not really. It will not even be human. I am prepared to do what's necessary for my people, for my future. I did not want to do that, but you were the one who pushed me. I will suffer, I know, but it will be worth it. This is my dream, my destiny, and I will do what is necessary to achieve it. You will not stop me. No one will. You never had any chance of winning. Surely you realize this now. Our game was always rigged." "No," Harry retorted, "you haven't won, not yet. Killing you will stop the ritual. You don't have a good track record here, I'm afraid. Your mother failed to do it with an entire realm at her back. Why do you think you would fare differently? Because I am the Master of Death, the man who united the Deathly Hallows, the Lord of Space and Time, and the last Peveril. And you, Gellert Grindelwald, have broken the rules of death and fate. And it's time to pay the price for your transgression." The silver scythe appeared in Harry's hand once more, and he grinned. "And I'm also not alone." As if they were waiting for his words, a familiar man walked out of the shadows. Vlad. Harry had made sure that the vampire would remain far away when Daphne's ritual took place, to avoid being affected as well. Similarly, Alexander Marinakis appeared in a burst of lightning, holding a trident in his hand, ready to attack as well. Surprisingly, Grindelwald grinned. "This is going to be fun."